The phone buzzed at 3:47 p.m. Corwin Ashford pressed it to his ear, his attention still fixed on the Manhattan skyline outside his corner office window. Another call, another deal, another day of building his empire. They're gone. The voice on the other end was barely recognizable. Raw, shattered, desperate. Sarin? He hadn't heard from her in 8 years. Not since that night. Our daughters. Someone took our daughters. The words didn't compute. They hung in the air like shrapnel, waiting to tear through everything he thought he knew. What daughters? Silence. A sound he would never forget followed. The sound of a mother breaking apart, piece by piece, across a phone line. Twins, Corwin, Luna and Briar. They're 7 years old, and they have your eyes. His hand began to shake. The phone pressed harder against his ear, as if crushing it closer could make this make sense. The world outside his window, the city he owned pieces of, the empire he'd spent a decade constructing, suddenly meant nothing. Absolutely nothing. 7 years, 7 birthdays, 7 first days of school, 7 years of moments he never knew existed, stolen before he could even begin to understand what he'd lost. Have you ever discovered that everything you thought you knew about your life was a lie? That the foundation you built your identity on was constructed from secrets and silence? Think about this for a moment. Really think about it. What would you do if you learned you had children you never knew existed, and they were in danger right now, this very second? How far would you go to save someone you've never met but who carries your blood, your DNA, your legacy? Would you burn down everything you'd built? Would you sacrifice the empire you spent years constructing? Would you face the truth about who you really are and what you really gave up? Corwin Ashford was about to answer every single one of these questions, and his answers would cost him more than he ever imagined, while giving him back something he didn't know he was missing. Here's what makes this story different from anything you've heard before. This isn't just about a kidnapping. This is about a man who conquered the business world but lost the only battle that actually mattered. A billionaire who could buy anything except the years he threw away. A father who didn't know he was a father until his children needed saving. But there's more. This is about the lies we tell ourselves to justify our choices. It's about the people who manipulate us from the shadows, playing chess with our lives while we think we're making our own decisions. And behind it all, the person Corwin trusted most had been pulling strings for years, destroying his happiness one calculated move at a time, turning him into a weapon against his own heart. The enemy wasn't outside his walls. The enemy had been sleeping under his roof. But here's what Corwin didn't know when that phone call shattered his afternoon. The kidnapper wasn't a stranger. The web of betrayal stretched deeper than he could have ever imagined, reaching back decades and across continents. Every choice he thought was his own had been influenced. Every relationship had been curated. Every door that closed and every door that opened had been controlled by hands he couldn't see. Stay until the end of this story, because what happens in the final moments will change how you see every relationship in your life. It will make you question every person who's ever smiled at you while hiding a knife behind their back. This is a story about loss, about redemption, about discovering that it's never too late to become the person you were meant to be, even when the world has spent years trying to turn you into someone else. If you're new here, welcome to Empire of Lies, where we tell stories that reveal the truth about human nature, the beautiful and the brutal. If this story moves you, if it grips something inside your chest and refuses to let go, take a second to subscribe and hit that notification bell. That way, you'll never miss a story that could shift your entire perspective on life, love, and loyalty. And right now, before we go any further, drop a comment below. Tell me, what would you do if you discovered you had children you never knew about? Would you drop everything? Would you even believe it? I read every single response, and I genuinely want to know. Now, let's go back to where it all began, 8 years earlier, to the night Corwin Ashford made the worst decision of his life, without even realizing what he was losing, 8 years before that devastating phone call. The apartment was dark when Corwin walked through the door. No lights in the kitchen, no dinner warming on the stove, no Sarin with her tired smile and her questions about his flight. Just shadows and silence, and a single lamp illuminating the living room. She was sitting on the couch, still, waiting, papers spread across the coffee table between them. "Sarin?" He set down his briefcase, confusion giving way to something colder. "What is this? When were you going to tell me?" Her voice was steady, too steady, the voice of someone who had already done their crying and moved on to something harder. "Tell you what." She slid her phone across the table. He picked it up, and his stomach dropped through the floor. On the screen, a Tokyo hotel bar. Emberlyn and Corwin, heads bent close together, his hand covering hers, their faces inches apart. The angle made it look intimate, made it look like exactly what it wasn't, or maybe exactly what it was, just without the physical act to confirm it. "Your mother sent me this," Sarin said, along with a detailed explanation of why this is best for everyone. Her words. Everything clicked into place and crumbled simultaneously. His mother, the strategic hiring of Emberlyn, the Tokyo trip she'd insisted on, the late nights she'd encouraged, all of it orchestrated, all of it designed to create exactly this moment. He'd just returned from 12 days in Japan, 12 days of closing the Pacific Rim deal, 12 days that felt like victory until this very second. "Sarin, nothing happened. I swear to you, nothing." "I know." He blinked. "You know?" "That's almost worse." Her eyes filled with something far more devastating than anger, because if you'd slept with her, I could hate you. I could be angry. I could call you a liar and a cheater and walk away clean. She stood up, crossing to the window, putting distance between them that felt permanent. "This way, I just have to accept that you prefer her company to mine. That somewhere along the way, I became something to return to instead of someone to come home to." The words hit him like physical blows, each one precisely aimed, each one impossibly accurate. Corwin had been living in hotels and conference rooms for nearly 3 weeks. The Singapore expansion had bled into the Tokyo negotiations. He'd texted Sarin sporadically, called twice, promised to be home in a few days, 4 different times. And when he'd finally sat in that Tokyo bar with Emberlyn, exhausted and disconnected and 12,000 miles from home, he'd felt lighter than he had in months. Sarin had seen it. In a single photograph, she'd seen what he'd been denying to himself. "That photograph doesn't show what you think. It shows enough." She turned to face him, and her composure cracked just slightly. "It shows you relaxed in a way you haven't been with me in 2 years. It shows you talking, really talking, when you've been giving me logistics and schedules. It shows you present. The one thing I've been begging for, and you gave it to her without even trying." He opened his mouth. Nothing came out, because she was right, and they both knew it. To understand why Corwin couldn't fight for his marriage, why he stood there silent while it crumbled, you have to understand the boy he used to be. William Ashford was a man who believed luck was a strategy. He'd sit at poker tables until dawn, convinced that the next hand would change everything. The next bet, the next roll of dice. He chased fortune like a man drowning chases air, desperately, blindly, with no thought for the people he was pulling under with him. Corwin was 9 years old the first time debt collectors came to their door. He remembers the sound of his mother's voice, Rosalind, barely 30, already aged by worry, promising them money she didn't have. He remembers hiding behind the couch, watching through the gap as strangers inventoried their furniture. He remembers the shame burning in his chest like swallowed fire. That shame never left. It just transformed. By 12, Corwin was working. Paper routes, lawn care, anything that put cash in his pocket and distance between himself and his father's failures. By 16, he'd started his first business, buying damaged electronics, repairing them, selling them for triple the cost. By 22, he'd turned a small construction loan into his first development project. Every building he raised after that was a monument, not to success, to survival. Every structure that pierced the Chicago skyline was a declaration. I crawled out of poverty, and I will never crawl back. His mother watched him climb with a complicated pride. Rosalind had survived her husband's addictions by learning to calculate every interaction, to trade emotions like currency. to see relationships as investments with expected returns. She'd taught Corwin everything he knew about reading people, about leverage, about never showing weakness. People will take everything from you if you let them, she told him once, when he was 14 and nursing a black eye from a fight he'd lost. Your job is to make sure you're the one doing the taking. He'd internalized that lesson completely. William Ashford died of a heart attack when Corwin was 26, still in debt, still chasing the next big win, still convinced his luck was about to change. Corwin paid for the funeral with money from his third development project. He didn't cry. He just looked at the casket and made a silent promise. I will never be you. I will never need anyone. I will never let anyone need me in a way that could destroy them. It was a promise born from love and twisted by fear. A promise that would cost him everything he actually wanted. Because here's the thing about building walls against poverty and pain and powerlessness. Those walls don't discriminate. They keep out the bad. But they keep out the good too. Corwin didn't know that yet. He was too busy building, too busy proving, too busy running from a ghost that lived inside his own chest. Every deal he closed was proof he wasn't his father. Every building he raised was evidence he would never beg. And every relationship he kept at arm's length was insurance against becoming the kind of man who needed anything he couldn't buy. By the time Corwin turned 30, he had developed a philosophy of life as carefully constructed as his buildings. Relationships were transactions. Every interaction had a value, an exchange rate, a bottom line. Friends were networking opportunities. Employees were resources to be optimized. Even family existed on a ledger, loyalty given, loyalty owed. This wasn't cynicism, not to Corwin. This was clarity. He'd watched his mother survive by calculating every smile, every favor, every carefully placed word. He'd watched his father destroy everything by believing in luck, in chance, in the goodness of others. The lesson was clear. The world didn't reward hope. It rewarded strategy. So Corwin became strategic. He defined his worth in numbers that could be verified. Square footage developed, profit margins achieved, magazine covers featuring his face. Net worth increases measured quarter by quarter. These were real. These were reliable. These didn't change their minds at 3 a.m. or decide they needed space or look at you with disappointment you couldn't fix. Love, on the other hand, was unpredictable, messy, dangerous. He'd seen what love did to his mother, how it trapped her with a man who gambled away her dreams, how it kept her making excuses long after the excuses ran dry. He'd seen what love did to his father, how it made him weak, dependent, always promising to change and never quite managing it. Love was a vulnerability Corwin couldn't afford, so he built walls, tall ones, thick ones, walls made of work hours and business trips and the convenient excuse of ambition. Walls that let people get close enough to be useful, but never close enough to be necessary. He filled his life with deals and dinners and handshakes with powerful people. He filled his calendar until there was no room for silence, no space for questions, no gap where loneliness could seep through. He told himself this was success, this was winning, this was the life his younger self had dreamed of while hiding behind that couch. But here's what Corwin never admitted, not even to himself. The walls weren't keeping danger out. They were keeping him trapped inside his own isolation, inside his own fear, inside the carefully constructed prison he'd built and decorated until it looked like freedom. The loneliness that crept in at 2 a.m. when deals were closed and phones stopped ringing. He called that focus. The emptiness that echoed in his penthouse apartment when he came home. To furniture that looked like a magazine spread, he called that independence. The ache that surfaced whenever he saw fathers playing with children in the park, he called that distraction. He was a master of renaming his wounds until they sounded like strengths. And for years it worked. The empire grew, the bank accounts swelled, the reputation solidified. Corwin Ashford became a name that opened doors and commanded respect. But names don't keep you warm at night. Reputations don't hold your hand when the darkness gets too loud. And all the money in the world can't buy back the years you spend building walls instead of bridges. Corwin didn't know this yet. He was about to learn, back in the apartment, the photograph still glowing on the phone between them. "That's not true," Corwin said desperately, crossing towards Sarin. "Emberlyn is a colleague, that's all. Whatever my mother is trying to make this look like, your mother isn't the problem, Corwin." Sarin's voice hardened. "Your mother is a symptom. You are the problem. I've been building something. For us. For our future." "Our future?" For the first time, anger flickered across her face. Real anger. The kind she'd been suppressing for years. "When's the last time you asked about my patients, my friends, my mother's health? When's the last time you knew what day it was without checking your calendar?" He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Because he couldn't remember. He literally could not recall the last time he'd asked her anything that wasn't logistical. "You've been here," Sarin continued, her voice breaking despite her efforts to control it. "But you haven't been present. You've been accounted for but not available. And I kept telling myself it would get better. After this deal, after this expansion, after this milestone. But there's always another one, isn't there? Sarin, there will always be another reason why you can't be here, why I have to be patient, why I have to adjust." She picked up the papers from the coffee table, holding them like evidence in a trial where the verdict was already determined. "I'm not enough for you anymore, Corwin." The anger faded, replaced by something worse. Resignation, acceptance, the exhaustion of someone who had been fighting alone for far too long. "Maybe I never was. Maybe I was just convenient, a checkpoint on your journey to becoming everything you always wanted to be." "You're not a checkpoint." His voice cracked. "You're my wife." "Am the first?" She set the papers back down. "Or am I just the person who's supposed to be here when you decide to come back? The plant that survives on whatever attention you have left after feeding your real priorities?" "I can change. I can." "Can you?" Those grey-green eyes held 3 years of accumulated disappointment. "Because I've been asking you to see me for 2 years and you've been looking right through me to whatever's next on your agenda. I've been standing right in front of you, waving my arms, screaming for your attention. And you've been too busy building your empire to notice I was drowning." He reached for her. She stepped back. "Don't," she said quietly. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to fight for us. I want you to tell me I'm wrong about everything. I want you to have evidence that contradicts every observation I've made for the last 2 years. Silence stretched between them. "But you don't have any of that, do you?" She smiled sadly. "You don't even have an argument. Because deep down, you know I'm right. You've known for a long time. You just didn't want to face it." The fight drained out of her as quickly as it had appeared. Sarin sat back down on the couch, suddenly looking smaller than he'd ever seen her. The woman who had walked into a hospital chapel and offered a stranger terrible coffee and unexpected grace, that woman seemed very far away now. "I used to dream about our future," she said quietly. "Children, Sunday mornings, growing old together in a house with a garden." "I did. I do." "No." She shook her head. "You want the idea of those things. You want to know they're available whenever you're ready. But you're never going to be ready, Corwin. There's always going to be another mountain to climb, another empire to build, another proof that you're not your father." The mention of his father struck him like a slap. How did she know? How did she see so clearly into the parts of himself he'd spent years burying? "I can't compete with a ghost," she continued, her voice breaking. "I can't fight against the fear that drives you, and I'm tired of trying." She picked up a pen from the coffee table and held it out to him. The divorce papers, already drawn up. His mother's lawyers must have prepared them the moment that photograph was taken. "Sign them. Let me go." "Sarin, please. You've already let me go in every way that matters." Her voice was gentle now, almost kind. The kindness of someone who has already grieved and arrived at acceptance. This is just making it official. He should have fought. He should have begged, explained, fallen to his knees and promised to burn his empire to the ground before he lost her. He should have called his mother right there and confronted her manipulation. He should have chosen Sarin over everything he built. But his pride was wounded. His mother's poison was doing its work, and somewhere deep down, in the place where his father's failures had carved permanent scars, he was terrified that Sarin was right, that he didn't know how to be the man she needed, that he never would. So he took the pen. He signed the initial separation agreement, the first step in a divorce process that would take weeks to finalize. The pen moved across paper. His name appeared on the line. 3 years of marriage began its legal dissolution. Sarin watched him sign with an expression he couldn't read. Relief? Disappointment? Both? "Thank you," she said softly, "for not making this worse." She gathered her copy of the papers, walked to the door, paused with her hand on the handle. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Corwin. I hope someday you realize it was here all along." The door closed behind her. Corwin sat in his corner office on the 42nd floor, watching Chicago bleed gold through floor-to-ceiling windows. The city sprawled beneath him like a conquered kingdom. Every light, every moving car, every person walking those streets below, they all seemed smaller from up here, insignificant. He'd spent 12 years climbing to this height. At 34 years old, he was the founder and sole owner of Ashford Development, a $300 million empire constructed from nothing but determination, sleepless nights, and a fury that never quite cooled. Marcus, his attorney, sat across the mahogany desk with a folder that felt heavier than its contents should allow. The divorce decree, finalized, ready for the signature that would make the separation permanent. "She didn't contest anything," Marcus said carefully, sliding the decree across the polished wood. "No alimony request, no claim to assets, clean as it gets." Corwin picked up his pen, the same pen he'd used 3 weeks ago in the apartment. The pen that had already ended his marriage once. This was just the legal formality. He signed without hesitation this time. The practice signature in the apartment had made this one easier. "I'll file these first thing Monday morning," Marcus said, gathering the papers. 30 days, and you'll be officially single." "Good." Marcus left. The door clicked shut, and Corwin Ashford stood alone with the consequences of a choice he was already beginning to question. But questioning meant feeling, and feeling meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant weakness. So he poured himself a drink instead. Now, you might be thinking, this man sounds cold, calculating, maybe even heartless. But here's the thing about walls. They don't just keep people out. They keep you trapped inside. And Corwin? He'd been trapped so long, he'd forgotten there was ever another way to live. The walls he built to protect himself became the prison that isolated him. The strategies he developed to avoid his father's weakness became the weaknesses that destroyed his marriage. The philosophy he created to survive poverty became the poverty of spirit that left him rich in everything except what mattered. He didn't know how to be vulnerable because vulnerability had only ever meant pain. He didn't know how to stay because staying meant risking the kind of loss he'd spent his whole life building defenses against. But 3 years earlier, something different had happened. A woman walked into the worst night of his life and refused to let him hide. Let me show you how that happened. 3 years before Corwin signed those divorce papers. Before Sarin changed everything, there was catastrophe. The Riverside Commons project was supposed to be Corwin's redemption story. Mixed-income housing in a neighborhood that had been written off by every other developer in Chicago. Affordable units, alongside market-rate apartments. A chance to prove that Corwin Ashford wasn't just another vulture picking at communities until only bones remained. He'd poured 18 months into the plans, fought city council for zoning variances, personally met with community leaders who'd been burned by developers before. He'd promised them something different. "This isn't about profit margins," he'd told a roomful of skeptical residents. "This is about building something that lasts, something that matters." He'd believed it. That was the worst part. He'd genuinely believed he could be the exception to every rule he'd built his career on. The building collapsed on a Tuesday afternoon in October. Structural failure in the eastern wing during construction. 2 workers dead before the dust settled. A third in critical condition, transported to Mercy General with injuries the paramedics described as not survivable. The investigation would later reveal a flaw in the foundation design. A calculation error that should have been caught in review but wasn't. Something Corwin hadn't personally overseen because he'd been too busy closing a deal in Miami, too confident in his team, too stretched across too many projects. People died because I cut corners I didn't know I was cutting, he would tell anyone who asked. But that was later. That night, the night of the collapse, he couldn't speak at all. Rock Bottom has a location. For Corwin, it was the chapel at Mercy General Hospital, 3rd floor. Empty at 3A, except for the shadows and the stained glass, and a man who didn't believe in God but had nowhere else to hide. He wasn't praying. Corwin didn't pray. He was just sitting in the darkness, letting the guilt crush him like the rubble had crushed his workers, like the truth had crushed his self-image. Somewhere in this city, families were grieving because of him. Children were asking where their fathers were. Wives were holding phones that would never ring with familiar voices again. Because of him, because of his project, his ambition, his need to prove he could be different while making the same mistakes everyone else made, the chapel was cold. The silence was absolute. And Corwin Ashford sat in the front pew wondering if this was what his father had felt. That crushing awareness that your choices had destroyed something you could never rebuild. He didn't know that in the next 5 minutes, someone would walk through those chapel doors and change everything. The door opened with a creak that echoed through the empty chapel. Corwin didn't look up. He didn't want to see a chaplain with rehearsed comfort or a security guard asking if he was supposed to be there. He didn't want to see anyone at all. But she sat down anyway, right beside him, on the same pew, close enough that he could smell rain and antiseptic and exhaustion. She didn't ask if the seat was taken. She just claimed it like she had every right to be there, which, he would learn later, she did. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. She stared at the same stained glass window he'd been not seeing for hours. Jesus with his arms outstretched, rendered in colors that looked different in the darkness. More purple than red, more shadow than light. Rough night? Her voice was low, tired, the voice of someone who had been carrying weight for miles and had finally found a place to set it down. Corwin almost laughed. Almost. You could say that. He finally looked at her. She was still wearing scrubs, and they were stained with something rust-colored that he didn't want to identify. Her dark hair was plastered to her face, like she'd walked through a storm to get there. Rain dripped from her sleeves onto the wooden pew. But her eyes, those were what stopped him. Grey-green, like coastal fog rolling over cold water. The kind of eyes that had seen too much and still chose to keep looking. The kind that cut through pretense, like surgical instruments. Construction accident, she said, not a question. The riverside collapse. His stomach dropped. How did you know? I'm a trauma nurse. Just spent 4 hours trying to save a 19-year-old who came in from your site. She paused. The silence held its breath. Marcus Chen. He didn't make it. Corwin's hands began to shake. He pressed them flat against his thighs to hide it. But she'd already seen. I should hate you, she said quietly. You should. You're the developer, Corwin Ashford. I saw your face on the news while they were cutting pieces of your building out of that boy's chest. Yes. She turned away from him, back to the stained glass, back to Jesus with his arms outstretched, as if waiting for someone to fall into them. The silence stretched. Corwin waited for the accusation, the rage, the justified fury of a woman who had watched someone die because of his project, his ambition, his failure to check the things that needed checking. Instead, she exhaled, long and slow, like she was releasing something she'd been holding since she walked through those doors. You got a name? Or should I just keep calling you the developer in my head? Corwin. Sarin. She didn't offer her hand. Neither did he. You're not sleeping tonight anyway. Neither am I. There's a diner 3 blocks east, terrible coffee, decent pie. She stood up, started walking toward the door. You coming? He shouldn't have followed. He knew that, even as he stood. But he did. The diner was exactly as she'd described. Fluorescent lighting that hummed off-key, coffee that tasted like it had been born bitter, and pie that arrived on chipped plates with a kind of defiant dignity. They sat across from each other in a booth with cracked vinyl seats, and for the first 20 minutes neither of them spoke about the collapse. They talked about nothing. Hospital politics, the way Chicago smelled different after rain, the specific exhaustion of work that never ended. Small talk, the kind strangers use to fill space while they decide whether to trust each other. Corwin was halfway through his second cup of terrible coffee when Sarin set down her fork and looked at him with those grey-green eyes. Marcus's father came to the hospital tonight. Corwin's throat closed. I can't. Just listen. Her voice was gentle but firm. Mr. Chen came while I was still cleaning his son's blood off my hands. The site manager was there too, the one whose crew ignored the warning signs, who should have called for a second inspection. What happened? I watched through the window. I expected screaming, violence, justified rage. She picked up her coffee cup, stared into its depths. Instead, Mr. Chen took the site manager's hand, looked him in the eyes and said, I forgive you. Corwin couldn't speak. He said, holding on to hate is like drinking poison and expecting someone else to die. My boy is gone. Destroying you won't bring him back. And carrying this rage will only destroy me too. The words hung in the air between them. I'm not telling you this to make you feel better, Sarin continued. Some guilt is heavy enough to be its own punishment. You don't need me to hate you. You're going to carry this forever anyway. It wasn't absolution. It was something more complicated. Recognition. She saw him clearly, saw the guilt eating him alive. And she didn't run from it, didn't minimize it. Didn't pretend it was smaller than it was. How do you keep doing this? Corwin asked. Watching people die, telling families the worst news of their lives. How do you not break? She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Who says I don't? I just do it here, in diners at 4 a.m., with terrible coffee and strangers who understand what it feels like to carry something impossible. What started as shared silence over cold pie didn't end when the sun came up. Corwin offered to drive Sarin home. She declined. I walk when I need to think, but she took his phone number, scrawled on a napkin with a pen borrowed from their waitress. In case you need someone who gets it, she said. He didn't expect her to call. People made those kinds of gestures all the time, polite offerings they never intended to honor. She called the next night at 2 a.m. Lost another one today. 16 years old, gunshot wound. His mother kept asking if he said anything at the end. Her voice was steady, but he could hear the cracks beneath it. He didn't. He was already gone when they brought him in, but I couldn't tell her that. So I made something up, told her he asked for her, told her his last word was, Mom. Was that wrong? I don't know. Maybe. Probably. A long breath. But she needed something to hold on to, and the truth would have just been more weight. They talked until dawn, not about the lie, about weight, about the things people carry when no one's watching, about the cost of being strong when the world keeps breaking around you. The calls became a rhythm, every few days, sometimes every night. Conversations that started at midnight and ended with sunrise bleeding through windows. They talked about everything and nothing. The specific exhaustion of their work, the loneliness neither of them would admit to anyone else, the way grief lived in your body long after you thought you'd processed it. Sarin was different from anyone Corwin had ever known. She wasn't impressed by his money. She'd grown up wealthy, parents who wrote checks instead of showing up, who bought her everything except presents. She'd deliberately chosen a career that kept her hands dirty and her conscience engaged. Medicine wasn't prestigious to her. It was penance for the guilt of having been born into comfort while others suffered. She challenged him in ways no one else dared. When he mentioned rebuilding his reputation after Riverside, she asked why reputation mattered more than the families still grieving. When he told her about the memorial fund he'd established, she asked if he'd actually met any of the children who had lost fathers. He hadn't. She made him. 2 weeks after they met, Corwin sat in a living room that smelled like grief and casseroles, facing a 7-year-old girl with her father's eyes. Maya Chen, Marcus's younger sister, not his daughter, but the child who would grow up without her big brother. Can you bring him back? She asked. The question broke something in him. I can't. Then why are you here? Corwin looked at this child who would carry the weight of his failure for the rest of her life, who would measure time as before and after the day her brother died because of calculations Corwin hadn't checked, inspections he hadn't demanded, corners he hadn't known were being cut. I'm here because I made a promise to someone, he said. And part of that promise is making sure this never happens to anyone else's brother or sister or father. I can't bring Marcus back, but I can make sure other families don't lose someone the same way. Maya considered this with devastating seriousness. You have to promise, for real, not adult promise, real promise. What's the difference? Real promise means you do it even when it's hard. Then I real promise. That promise changed everything. Corwin reformed his company's safety protocols, hired independent inspectors for every project, created a fund for workers' families that would outlast him. He became the developer who cared more about foundations than profits, not for reputation, but because a 7-year-old had looked at him with her brother's eyes and demanded he be better. And through all of it, Sarin was there, not pushing, not pulling, just present. Like a lighthouse he didn't know he needed until he was already saved from the rocks. They married 6 months later. Small ceremony on the Lake Michigan pier. Just them, a justice of the peace, and waves crashing against the stones. The day was overcast, threatening rain but never quite delivering. The kind of weather that felt appropriate, not perfect, not terrible, just real. I don't need a big wedding, Sarin told him when they were planning. She was wearing jeans and one of his sweatshirts, her hair pulled back, no makeup. I don't need my parents flying in to perform for their society friends. I just need you to mean it. I've never meant anything more. And he hadn't. That was the tragedy he wouldn't understand until much later. He meant every single word. The justice of the peace kept it simple. Traditional vows with one addition Sarin requested. Do you promise to be present, not just accounted for? I do. Do you promise to choose this, us, even when it's inconvenient? I do. They kissed. The lake applauded with waves. And Corwin Ashford believed, for the first time in his adult life, that maybe he could be something other than what his father's failures had made him. He was wrong, but he didn't know that yet. Now, I need you to understand something. This wasn't a fairy tale romance. Corwin didn't suddenly become a perfect person because a beautiful woman challenged him. He didn't wake up transformed, his old patterns erased, his walls demolished by the power of love. He became a better person because, for the first time in his life, someone saw past his defenses and decided he was worth the effort. Someone met him at his lowest and chose to sit beside him, instead of walking away. That kind of love changes you, but it can also terrify you. Because once you let someone in, truly in, they can see all the parts of you that you've been hiding, the fears you've disguised as ambition, the wounds you've covered with success, the emptiness you've filled with achievement because you didn't know what else to put there. And Corwin? He had a lot to hide, even from himself. The walls he'd built over 30 years didn't disappear because he found love. They just shifted, found new positions, new justifications. Because here's the truth about people who build walls. They don't know how to live without them. The walls feel like safety, like identity, like the very architecture of who they are. Taking them down feels like dying. And Corwin wasn't ready to die. Not yet. Not even for her. The memorial fund changed everything. What started as penance became publicity. The story of the developer who turned tragedy into transformation captured the attention of every major business publication in the country. Forbes ran a profile. The Wall Street Journal called him the conscience of commercial real estate. Architectural Digest featured his redesigned safety protocols as industry-leading innovation. Suddenly, everyone wanted a piece of Corwin Ashford, not the ruthless businessman he'd been building toward, but the ethical developer, the man who cared, the proof that profit and principle could coexist. Investors who had ignored his calls for years were now pursuing him. Partners materialized from networks he'd never known existed. Opportunities multiplied faster than he could evaluate them. Dallas wanted him to revitalize a failing downtown corridor. Seattle offered exclusive rights to waterfront development. Boston presented a public-private partnership worth more than everything he'd built so far combined. And Corwin, who had spent his entire life chasing proof that he mattered, suddenly had more proof than he knew what to do with. "This is it," he told Sarin 6 months into their marriage, his voice electric with possibility. "Everything I've been working toward, everything I survived for." She'd looked at him from the kitchen where she was making dinner. Something simple, just the two of them. A Tuesday night with no special occasion except being together. Something flickered in her eyes. Not concern. Not yet. Something softer. Something like a question she wasn't ready to ask. "Just remember why you started," she said. "That memorial fund wasn't about empire. It was about Maya. About real promises." "I remember," he assured her. "I'll always remember." But success has its own gravity, its own momentum, its own hunger that grows with every feeding. The more Corwin achieved, the more he needed to achieve. Each victory demanded a larger sequel. Each proof required more evidence. The fear that had driven him since childhood, never be powerless, never be at anyone's mercy, didn't diminish with success. It just demanded more insurance, more safety, more height. His travel increased. Dallas one week, Seattle the next, Boston after that. Conference calls at midnight, breakfast meetings in different time zones. He was building something that would outlast him, something that would prove beyond all doubt that Corwin Ashford was not his father, could never be his father. The hours grew longer. The trips stretched further. The distance between his body and his home, between his promises and his presence, widened inch by inch. He didn't notice at first. The empire was too loud, the achievement too intoxicating, the validation too necessary for a man who had spent his childhood being told he wasn't enough. "Temporarily," he kept saying, "just until we close this deal, just until we secure this partnership, just until the Pacific Rim expansion is finalized." There was always a just until. There was always another mountain that needed climbing before he could rest. And somewhere in the climbing, he forgot what he was climbing toward. Or rather, he forgot who was waiting at home while he conquered peaks that kept growing taller. Sarin had always known how to build a life around absence. Growing up with parents who communicated through assistance and showed affection through trust fund deposits, she'd learned early that waiting was a skill, that expecting less meant hurting less. That love sometimes looked like showing up for yourself when no one else would. So when Corwin's travel increased, when his calls became shorter and less frequent, when his physical presence became something she scheduled around rather than counted on, she adjusted. She picked up extra shifts at the hospital. The ER always needed nurses, and there was something comforting about the chaos there. At least in trauma medicine, the emergencies were visible. The wounds could be addressed. The pain had a location and a treatment plan. Not like marriage. Not like watching someone drift away while insisting they were still right beside you. She filled their apartment with plants. Snake plants that thrived on neglect. Pothos vines that climbed toward windows regardless of care. Succulents that stored what they needed and asked for nothing more. She talked to them when Corwin wasn't there, which was often, "He's closing a deal in Seattle," she'd tell the fiddle leaf fig by the window. Important stuff. World-changing stuff. The plants never asked when he was coming home. The plants never looked at her with disappointed eyes. The plants just grew toward whatever light was available and made the best of insufficient conditions. Sarin understood that. She was doing the same thing. The meals she made started going cold. She learned to cook for one again. Portion sizes shrinking, recipes simplifying, the elaborate dinners she'd planned replaced by takeout containers and wine drunk alone on the couch. Her language shifted without her noticing. "When you're home," instead of "tonight." "If you can make it," instead of "I'll see you there." "Whenever works for you," instead of "I need you." She wasn't building walls, not like Corwin. She was building bridges, bridges that could hold weight even when he wasn't walking across them. structures that could exist independently while still leaving room for connection. But bridges need traffic to serve their purpose. Without someone crossing, they're just elaborate constructions spanning empty space. The hospital became her primary community. Dr. Vasquez and the other trauma surgeons, the nurses who understood that some nights the only thing getting you through was knowing someone else was suffering alongside you. Her colleagues started calling her the Rock. Unshakable, reliable, the one who could handle anything. They didn't know that rocks erode too, that even the strongest foundations crack when the pressure comes from the wrong angle, that she was holding steady not because she was invincible, but because collapsing felt like admitting defeat. And Sarin Ashford didn't know how to admit defeat. Not yet. 2 years into the marriage, the cracks became visible. Sarin stood at the stove, making a dinner she knew he probably wouldn't eat, stirring a sauce she'd perfected during months of practice while waiting for him to come home. The apartment smelled like rosemary and garlic, and the particular sadness of someone cooking for two while knowing only one would show. Her phone showed 7:47 p.m. He'd texted at 5:30 saying he was leaving the office soon. That was 2 hours ago. The hospital gala was lovely tonight, she said when he finally walked through the door at 9:15, still loosening his tie, still checking his phone. Dr. Vasquez asked about my mysterious husband. Corwin set his briefcase down with the particular heaviness of a man who had just navigated rush-hour traffic after a 12-hour day. The Singapore investors pushed the meeting to 6 p.m. You know how these things go. I'll make the next one. You said that about the last one too. Something in her voice made him pause. Not anger. Sarin rarely got angry. Anger was loud and obvious, and easily dismissed. This was quieter. This was a sound he hadn't learned to identify yet. Tired. The word was tired. He set the phone down, crossed to where she stood at the stove, reached for her shoulder the way he used to. Back when touching her was instinct instead of afterthought. Hey, I'm sorry. I know I've been absent, she finished. The word is absent, Corwin. He winced. Temporarily, just until we close the Pacific Rim expansion and then there'll be another expansion, another deal, another milestone. She stirred without looking at him. I'm not upset. I'm just noticing. Noticing what? She turned, and her eyes, those fog-over-water eyes that had seen him at his worst and chosen him anyway, held something he couldn't name, something beyond disappointment, something that looked like a calculation being made, that I'm building a life around your absences instead of your presence, and I'm trying to figure out if that's something I should keep doing. The words hit him like a physical blow, like a punch he hadn't seen coming because he'd been too busy looking at the horizon to notice the ground crumbling beneath his feet. Sarin, I'm not giving you an ultimatum. I'm just being honest. She turned back to the stove. I can wait. I've always been good at waiting, but I'm starting to wonder what exactly I'm waiting for. That night, Corwin held her close. He spoke promises into her hair, promises that things would change, that the expansion would end, that he would be present and available and the husband she deserved. He meant every word. His phone rang at midnight. Crisis in the Seattle office. The Henderson deal was imploding. Everything they'd worked toward for 18 months was about to collapse unless he was on a plane by morning. Sarin's eyes were open in the darkness when he started packing. I'll be back in 3 days, he said. 4 at most. I know. He kissed her forehead. She didn't move toward him, didn't move away either, just lay there in the darkness, watching him choose. He was in the air before dawn. The Henderson deal closed successfully 10 days later. By then, something else had closed too, something he wouldn't recognize until it was far too late to reopen. Now, let me ask you something. Have you ever made a promise you genuinely meant and still broken it? Have you ever told someone, I'll be there, and let something else take priority? Have you ever watched yourself make a choice you knew was wrong and felt powerless to stop it? Drop a comment below. If you've ever let work or ambition steal time from someone you loved, if you've ever woken up one day and realized you'd been so busy building a future that you forgot to live in the present, you're not alone. And this story is about to show you exactly where that path leads. If you're feeling this story, if it's hitting close to home, if it's making you think about the choices you've been making, take a second and hit that like button. It helps more people discover these truths, and honestly, it helps me know that these stories matter to you. What Corwin didn't know, what he wouldn't discover for years, was that his mother had been calling Sarin for months. Rosalind Ashford was a woman who had survived her husband's addiction by becoming something harder than the circumstances that tried to break her. She'd learned to trade emotions like currency, to view relationships as investments with expected returns, to see weakness as an invitation for exploitation. She loved Corwin, in her way, the way predators love their territories, the way gardeners love the plants they control. And she had never approved of Sarin, a trauma nurse, a woman who chose to be covered in other people's blood when she could have chosen comfort, a wife who didn't come from old money, didn't understand the strategic value of social connections, didn't contribute to the Ashford brand in any measurable way. Sarin was, in Rosalind's estimation, an anchor, a distraction, a weakness her son couldn't afford. But Rosalind was too smart for direct confrontation, too experienced in manipulation to make obvious moves. She knew that attacking Sarin openly would only drive Corwin closer to his wife. Men were predictable that way, rallying to defend what was threatened. So she chose subtlety instead. The phone call started as concern. "How are you holding up, dear?" Corwin mentioned the Singapore trip ran long. It must be hard, being alone so much. Then, observations. Neutral on the surface, poisonous underneath. "He seems so stressed lately. I worry about him spreading himself too thin." Of course, he was always so focused before he got married, before everything changed. Then, gentle suggestions. "A trauma nurse's salary, while noble, can't possibly provide the flexibility he needs in a partner right now. Not that I'm saying anything negative, of course, just thinking out loud about what might help him succeed." She never said, "Leave him." She never needed to. Rosalind was planting seeds in soil that Corwin had already weakened with his neglect, watering doubts he had already created with his absence. She simply accelerated what was already in motion. But seeds take time, even with careful cultivation, and Rosalind had bigger plans than passive destruction. She'd watched her son build an empire, watched him climb from the poverty his father had created to the heights she'd always known he was capable of reaching. And now that he was finally becoming the man she'd raised him to be, she wasn't about to let an inconvenient marriage stand in the way. Corwin needed a partner who could strengthen his position, expand his network, open doors he didn't even know existed. Sarin Ashford could do none of those things. But Rosalind knew someone who could. So while she whispered doubt into Sarin's ear through carefully timed phone calls, she began constructing something else entirely. Not just destruction. That was too simple, too wasteful. Rosalind preferred controlled demolition, followed by rebuilding according to her blueprints. She'd raised her son from nothing. She'd made him into the man he was today, and she wasn't finished shaping him yet. Emberlyn Cross arrived at Ashford Development on a Tuesday morning in March, her resume impeccable and her intentions invisible. Yale architecture degree, family name that opened every door in Chicago's old money circles. The Crosses had built half the city's landmark buildings in the 1920s. Design aesthetic that balanced innovation with the kind of classical elegance that made investors feel safe. On paper, she was exactly what Ashford Development needed for the Pacific Rim expansion, a design consultant who could bridge the gap between Corwin's ambitious vision and the conservative tastes of institutional money. Rosalind had hired her without telling Corwin. "She's brilliant," Rosalind said when he questioned it, her tone carrying that particular blend of motherly concern and strategic certainty that he'd learned never to challenge. "Her family built this city's foundation, and she understands our world, Corwin. She won't need to be explained to." The pause before "explained to" said everything Rosalind didn't need to speak aloud. Unlike Sarin, unlike the nurse who didn't know which fork to use at charity galas, unlike the wife who asked uncomfortable questions at board dinners, and genuinely didn't care about stock valuations, Corwin should have fired Emberlyn immediately. He should have recognized his mother's fingerprints all over this hiring decision, should have seen the setup for what it was, a carefully positioned alternative, a replacement waiting in the wings. But he was exhausted, stretched thin across continents and time zones and deals that never stopped demanding more. Emberlyn was efficient and available, and didn't look at him with eyes that asked questions he was too tired to answer. She was easy, not in any inappropriate way. Not yet. But easy in the way that a well-designed system is easy, predictable, low maintenance. She anticipated his needs without him having to articulate them, finished his sentences in meetings, brought him coffee without being asked, prepared exactly the way he liked it. She was beautiful too, but a different kind of beautiful than Sarin, sharp and intentional and perfectly maintained, the kind of beauty that took 2 hours and 7 products every morning. The kind that never surprised you because it was always calculated for effect. The business dinners became longer, the late nights more frequent. They were always working, always professional. But somewhere along the way, Corwin stopped mentioning his wife. Not consciously, not deliberately. Sarin just stopped being relevant to the conversations he was having, stopped being present in the world he was building. He didn't notice the absence. He didn't notice a lot of things. But Emberlyn did. She noticed every time his phone rang with Sarin's name, and he sent it to voicemail. Every time he checked his watch when talking about going home. Every time he looked at her with the particular relief of a man who'd found someone who demanded nothing of him except his professional excellence. She filed these observations away carefully. Emberlyn Cross was many things, but impatient wasn't one of them. Here's what makes manipulation so dangerous. It never looks like manipulation. It looks like help, like concern, like someone finally understanding you when everyone else seems to be demanding too much. It arrives in comfortable packaging with reasonable explanations. It speaks in the voice of people you trust, people you love, people who have your best interests at heart. By the time you realize you've been played, the damage is already done. The choices have been made, the bridges have been burned, and you're standing in the wreckage, wondering how you got there when every individual step seemed so logical. Corwin was too exhausted to see what was happening, too far from home to notice the trap being set around him, too convinced of his own intelligence to imagine that someone might be outsmarting him. His mother, his new design consultant, the walls he'd built himself, that someone else was now using against him. He thought he was building an empire. He didn't realize he was building a prison, one with invisible bars and a lock he couldn't see. The enemy wasn't outside his walls. The enemy had been sleeping under his roof his entire life, and now she was positioning the final pieces. 12,000 miles from Chicago, a hotel bar in Tokyo with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a city that never slept. Corwin swirled whiskey in a crystal glass, watching the lights of Shibuya pulse like a living organism below. The meeting with the Japanese investors had gone perfectly. 18 months of negotiations culminating in a handshake worth $400 million. The Pacific Rim expansion was finally real. Emberlyn sat across from him, her own glass of wine catching the ambient glow. She'd been invaluable in these negotiations. Her design presentations had won over skeptics. Her understanding of cultural nuance had smoothed potential friction. She was good at her job. He had to admit that. To new horizons, she said, raising her glass. He clinked his against hers. To the next phase. They drank in comfortable silence, the kind of silence that happens between people who have spent too many late nights in conference rooms together, who know each other's rhythms and preferences without having to ask. "You seem lighter here," Emberlyn observed, setting down her glass. "Lighter than when you talk about home." He should have shut this down immediately, should have changed the subject, mentioned Sarin, reminded both of them that professional boundaries existed for reasons. Instead, loosened by whiskey and exhaustion, and the intoxicating distance of being 12 time zones away from everything familiar, home is complicated. Is it? Her eyes held his a moment too long. Or is it just not where you want to be anymore? The question landed somewhere vulnerable, somewhere he'd been protecting without realizing it needed protection. He ordered another drink instead of answering, but she waited. Emberlyn was patient that way, never pushed, just created space and let him fill it. "Sarin doesn't understand this world," he heard himself saying, words he'd never spoken aloud, words that felt like betrayal even as they left his mouth. The pressure, the stakes. She saves lives one patient at a time, and that's noble, but she doesn't understand that I'm building things that will outlast us all. Emberlyn leaned forward, her voice silk wrapped around suggestion. Maybe she doesn't want to understand. Maybe she wants you to stay small so she doesn't have to grow. It was such a clever lie, dressed up as insight, presented as support, a manipulation so subtle it felt like validation, like finally being understood by someone who spoke his language. I never thought of it that way, he admitted. You've been thinking about it wrong. Her hand touched his briefly, a gesture that could have been professional but wasn't. You're extraordinary, Corwin. You deserve someone who sees that, who celebrates it instead of resenting it. He should have heard the trap closing. He should have recognized the script, how perfectly her words aligned with his fears, how precisely she was exploiting vulnerabilities he hadn't known were visible. But he was tired, so tired of feeling guilty, so tired of coming home to eyes that asked questions he couldn't answer, so tired of being the villain in a story he didn't know how to rewrite. When he returned to Chicago 5 days later, the trap had already sprung. He just didn't know it yet. Rosalind had many skills, but photography was her most dangerous. The image she'd captured, or more likely, had someone capture, was perfect, not fabricated, not doctored, just perfectly angled. Corwin and Emberlyn in that Tokyo bar, leaning close, his hand over hers, their faces inches apart, caught mid-laugh at something he couldn't even remember now. Completely innocent in context, damning in isolation. She'd sent it to Sarin 3 days before Corwin's return flight. Enough time for the poison to work. Enough time for Sarin to spiral, to question, to make decisions while hurt and alone. The accompanying message was a masterpiece of manipulation. Dear Sarin, I thought you should know what your husband does when he's away. I've tried to stay out of this, but as his mother, I can't watch you be humiliated any longer. Emberlyn Cross has been pursuing him for months. I hired her thinking she'd be professional, but I was wrong. Perhaps it's time you considered whether this marriage is serving either of you. You deserve better than to be the woman he comes back to when his real life gets exhausting. Rosalind. Every sentence carefully crafted, every word designed to wound while appearing to help. The photography, the timing, the consem disguised as cruelty, disguised as consem. By the time Corwin walked through the door of their apartment, Sarin had already drawn up the separation papers, had already consulted with the lawyers Rosalind had helpfully recommended, had already made the decision to leave while he was still celebrating success in Tokyo. Rosalind Ashford was many things. Patient was chief among them. This section already correctly written in Chapter 1, Parts 1, 4 and 5. No rewrite needed, referring back to avoid repetition. The apartment confrontation, the accusations, the photograph, the painful truths Sarin spoke about his absence. And then, the papers. I used to dream about our future, she said quietly. Children, Sunday mornings, growing old together in a house with a garden. I used to believe you wanted those things too. I did. I do. No. She shook her head. You want the idea of those things. You want to know they're available whenever you're ready. But you're never going to be ready, Corwin. There's always going to be another mountain to climb, another empire to build, another proof that you're not your father. The mention of his father struck him like a slap. How did she know? How did she see so clearly into the parts of himself he'd spent years burying? I can't compete with a ghost, she continued, her voice breaking. I can't fight against the fear that drives you, and I'm tired of trying. She picked up a pen from the coffee table and held it out to him. The separation agreement, already drawn up. His mother's lawyers must have prepared them the moment that photograph was taken. Sign them. Let me go. Sarin, please. You've already let me go in every way that matters. Almost kind. The kindness of someone who has already grieved and arrived at acceptance. This is just making it official. He took the pen. He signed the initial separation agreement, the first step in a divorce process that would take weeks to finalize. 3 weeks later, in his corner office, he would sign the final decree with Marcus watching. But this moment, this apartment, this night, this signature. This was when his marriage actually ended. Sarin gathered her copy of the papers, walked to the door, paused, with her hand on the handle. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Corwin. I hope someday you realize it was here all along." The door closed behind her, and she was carrying more than heartbreak when she left. But he wouldn't know that for 8 years. Let me stop here for a moment, because some of you are angry at Corwin right now. How could he let her go? You're thinking, how could he not fight? But here's what I need you to understand. Fear doesn't make us run away. It makes us freeze. It makes us choose the pain we know over the risk of something worse. Corwin didn't sign those papers because he didn't love Sarin. He signed them because he was terrified that she was right about him, and he didn't know how to be better. He signed them because fighting would have meant admitting he was broken, and admitting you're broken means accepting that you need to change. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't fighting. Sometimes it's admitting you're wrong. Sometimes it's being vulnerable enough to say, "I don't know how to fix this, but I'm willing to learn." Corwin wasn't brave enough. Not yet. But that's the thing about not yet. It means there's still time. It means the story isn't over. It means even when you make the worst decision of your life, there might still be a chance to make it right, if you're willing to pay the price. And the price Corwin was about to pay? 8 years of not knowing his own children existed. 8 years passed like a sentence served. The empire grew beyond anything Corwin had imagined possible. $1 billion valuations, international acclaim, his face on magazine covers in 12 countries. Ashford Development became synonymous with ethical luxury, with conscious capitalism, with the future of urban living. Forbes called him the conscience of real estate. The Wall Street Journal profiled him as the man who rebuilt his industry's soul. Architectural Digest dedicated an entire issue to his philosophy of design. And through all of it, Corwin felt like a man building monuments to his own emptiness. He never married again, never came close. There were women, of course, beautiful women attracted to his wealth, his status, his image on those magazine covers. Women who laughed at his jokes and agreed with his opinions and looked at him with eyes full of want. But none of them saw him. None of them challenged him. None of them had fogwater eyes that cut through pretense like surgical instruments. He compared everyone to Sarin. Everyone failed the comparison. Emberlyn revealed her true colors within months of the divorce. She'd wanted the Ashford name, not the man attached to it. And when he didn't propose, when he finally saw her for what she was, she moved on to a senator with fewer complications and better prospects. Rosalind acted surprised. Corwin wasn't fooled. The confrontation happened 6 months after the divorce was finalized. He'd finally put the pieces together. The convenient timing, the perfectly staged photograph, the lawyers who'd been ready before Sarin even asked for them. "Did you orchestrate my divorce?" He asked his mother over dinner at her favorite restaurant. She didn't deny it. "I protected your future. You destroyed my marriage. I removed an obstacle." Rosalind sipped her wine, unrepentant. "That woman was holding you back. Look at what you've accomplished since she left. Look at the empire you've built. I would trade all of it to have her back." "Don't be dramatic, darling. You'll thank me eventually." He didn't speak to his mother for 2 years after that night. When they finally reconciled, if you could call it that, their relationship became transactional. Holiday obligations, business updates delivered through assistants, the pretense of family without any of its substance. And through it all, he thought about Sarin. Every building he approved, he wondered if she'd approve of its design. Every charity gala, he searched crowds for dark hair and steady hands. Every night, he lay awake in beds that were too large and too cold and too quiet. And he understood finally what she meant about building a life around absences. He was living in the shape of her, and she wasn't there. He hired investigators once, 3 years after the divorce. They found her in Portland, working at a pediatric hospital, living in a modest house in a neighborhood with old trees. The report mentioned she appeared to be doing well, healthy, stable, alone. He almost flew there, almost showed up at her door with all the apologies he'd rehearsed in the middle of sleepless nights. But what would he say? "I'm sorry I let you go. I'm sorry I chose empire over everything that mattered. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to be the man you needed." Would she even care? She'd moved on, built a life without him, probably found someone who actually showed up, who didn't measure worth in square footage and profit margins. He told himself she was better off. He told himself a lot of things during those 8 years. None of them made the nights any shorter. None of them filled the space she'd left behind. None of them answered the question that haunted him most. What if he'd fought? What if he'd been brave? What if he'd chosen differently? 8 years of what-ifs, piled like unpaid debts. A February morning in Portland, Oregon, cold rain against hospital windows. The smell of antiseptic and new beginnings. Sarin gave birth to twin girls at 4:47 a.m. She held them for the first time with tears streaming down her face. Not from pain, but from the overwhelming collision of joy and grief that only a single mother knows. 2 perfect faces, 2 sets of tiny fingers, 2 hearts beating against her chest. Luna and Briar, names meaning light and strength. They were born with their mother's smile and their father's grey eyes, born into a life their father didn't know existed. She'd discovered the pregnancy 3 weeks after leaving Chicago. Sat on the bathroom floor of a rented apartment in Portland, staring at the test results, trying to understand how the universe could be so cruel and so generous simultaneously. She'd moved to Portland because her mother had fallen ill. Stage 3, cancer. Someone needed to be there, and Sarin's father had abandoned them decades ago. So she'd packed her life into boxes, driven west, and built something new while caring for someone dying. She'd almost called Corwin when she found out about the pregnancy. Almost. But then she remembered the photograph, the way he'd signed without fighting, the relief she'd seen flicker across his face when she'd offered him an exit. He didn't want her. He'd made that clear. Why would he want the complications she was carrying? And her mother needed her. The cancer was aggressive. The treatments were brutal. Sarin couldn't handle a hostile CO parenting situation while watching her mother fade, so she stayed silent, rebuilt her existence from fragments, returned to nursing after the twins were born, specializing in pediatric care. There was something healing about helping other people's children while raising her own. Her mother died when the twins were 4. Peaceful, finally, free from pain, and in her final days she'd held her granddaughters and whispered to Sarin, "You did the right thing, protecting them. Some men don't deserve to know what they're missing." Sarin wasn't sure she agreed, but by then 4 years had passed. 4 years of Luna and Briar growing up without a father. 4 years of birthday parties and first steps and midnight fevers managed alone. How do you call someone after 4 years and say, "By the way, you have daughters"? So 4 years became 5. 5 became 6. 6 became 7. She created a home full of books and laughter and an absence she explained with careful half-truths. "Your father loved us very much," she told Luna and Briar when they asked. And they asked. Of course they asked. Every child wants to know where they come from. But sometimes grown-ups break in ways that can't be fixed. It doesn't mean you're not loved. It just means some loves don't survive their own weather. It was the kindest version of the truth she could offer, the one that protected them from her own pain while honoring the reality of what happened. She told herself the girls were better off without a father who chose ambition over family. She told herself she was protecting them from disappointment. Maybe she was also protecting herself. From hearing his voice, from seeing his face, from confronting the part of her that still loved him despite everything he'd done. 8 years is a long time to keep a secret. But secrets have a way of refusing to stay buried. 8 years expressed as a number. 2,922 days of parallel lives. Corwin in boardrooms making billions while Sarin in hospital rooms saved children. 2 daughters growing up without knowing that their father's face appeared in magazine profiles and newspaper headlines. 2,922 days of birthday parties with an empty seat no one mentioned. 2,922 days of Father's Day projects at school, handled with gentle teacher interventions and alternative assignments. 2,922 days of bedtime questions. "Mummy, What was Daddy like? Why doesn't he visit? Does he know about us? 2,922 days of careful answers. He was complicated, baby. He loved big things, buildings, ideas, achievements. Sometimes people get so focused on big things they forget to see the small ones right in front of them. Luna grew more curious with each passing year, collecting fragments of information like puzzle pieces. She found her father's face in a business magazine at the library when she was 6. Portland's own makes billions in Chicago, and stared at it for 20 minutes without speaking. She traced the lines of his jaw, the shape of his eyes, her eyes, and asked questions Sarin couldn't answer. Does he know we exist? No, sweetheart. He doesn't. Why didn't you tell him? How do you explain adult failures to a child? How do you confess that pride and pain made decisions that logic would have rejected? Because sometimes when people hurt each other very badly, they need time apart. And by the time I was ready to tell him, too much time had passed. It felt too complicated to explain. Briar accepted this explanation. Luna didn't. You should tell him now, Luna insisted. Everyone makes mistakes. You tell us that all the time. You're right, baby. I should. Someday I will. But someday never came. 2,922 days of two little girls developing their father's determination without knowing where it came from. His stubborn refusal to accept easy answers. His drive to understand everything completely before moving forward. His grey eyes that saw through people's pretense. They were his daughters in every way that mattered. And he had no idea they existed. Somewhere in Chicago, Corwin searched for something he couldn't name. Somewhere in Portland, Sarin built something she couldn't share. And 2,922 days accumulated like interest on a debt that would eventually come due. With interest, with consequences neither of them could have anticipated. The night before, everything changed. Corwin sat in his Chicago penthouse, reviewing architectural plans for the Austin development. The numbers were good. The projections were solid. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. And yet, something restless stirred in his chest. An ache he'd learned to ignore but never quite managed to silence. The feeling that his life was a beautifully decorated waiting room, and he'd been sitting there for 8 years without knowing what he was waiting for. He set down the plans, walked to the window, looked out at the city he'd conquered. All those lights, all those buildings, all that proof of his worth. It wasn't enough. It had never been enough. What are you looking for? He asked his reflection in the glass. The man who stared back had grey in his temples now, and lines around his eyes. A man who had everything and possessed nothing that mattered. The reflection didn't answer. 1,200 miles away, Sarin tucked 2 sleepy girls into matching beds in a modest Portland home. Story time, Mummy? Luna asked, fighting to keep her eyes open. Always, baby. She read from their favorite book. A tale of a princess who rescued herself, because these girls were going to grow up knowing they didn't need anyone to save them. Briar fell asleep first, her breathing soft and even. Luna held on longer, as she always did. Mummy? Yes, sweetheart. Will I ever meet Daddy? The question landed like a stone in still water. Sarin brushed hair from her daughter's forehead, buying time she didn't have. Maybe someday, baby. Maybe someday. Do you think he'd like us? I think he'd love you more than anything in the world, if he knew you existed. Luna considered this with 7-year-old seriousness. Then maybe we should tell him. Sarin's heart clenched. Maybe. Someday soon. Luna's eyes closed. Her breathing deepened. And Sarin sat in the darkness of her daughter's bedroom, wondering if she'd been wrong to keep this secret for so long. Tomorrow, she'd think about it tomorrow, maybe even reach out. Maybe it was time. She didn't know that tomorrow the choice would be taken from her, that in less than 24 hours, everything she'd built to protect them would shatter. Neither of them slept well that night. Some part of them already knew. 8 years. Think about that, family. 2,922 days. That's how long Corwin lived without knowing that his eyes looked back at him from 2 little faces every single day. That's how long Sarin protected her daughters from a truth she thought would only hurt them. And that's how long a secret can grow before it explodes. Some of you might be judging Sarin right now for not telling him. He had a right to know, you're thinking. Those were his children too. But ask yourself, if you'd been dismissed the way she was, if you'd been made to feel like an obstacle instead of a partner, if you'd watched someone sign away your marriage without fighting, would you have reached out? Would you have risked rejection again? Would you have offered your children to someone who might treat them the same way he treated you? Would you have complicated their lives with a father who might disappoint them the way he disappointed you? Sometimes silence isn't deception. Sometimes it's survival. Sometimes it's a wounded person making the best decision they can with the information they have. Sarin was wrong to keep the secret. Corwin was wrong to create the conditions that made her feel she had to. Everyone was wrong. And two little girls were about to pay the price. Because while Corwin was building his empire, and Sarin was protecting her daughters, someone else had been watching. Someone else had been planning. Someone from the shadows of the past, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Tomorrow, that moment would arrive. Tuesday afternoon. Nothing special about it. Corwin sat at his desk. Austin development plans spread before him like a map to a future that suddenly felt less important than it had yesterday. The morning meeting had gone well. The investors were satisfied. The timeline was on track. Just another day in the empire. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. Portland area code. 503. He didn't recognize it. His thumb hovered over the decline button. He was busy. The Pacific Northwest Regional Office needed his attention. A meeting with Seattle contractors was scheduled for 4 p.m. 100 reasons to ignore a call from a stranger. But something made him pause. Something he couldn't name. A feeling like standing at the edge of a cliff, not knowing what waited below, but sensing that jumping was inevitable. He answered, "Corwin?" One word, her voice. 8 years dissolving in a single syllable. The world stopped. His heart stuttered. Time itself seemed to freeze around him, leaving only the sound of her breathing and the echo of his own name in a voice he'd never forgotten. Sarin? He hadn't said her name out loud in years. It felt strange in his mouth. Too familiar, too painful, too loaded with everything he'd tried to bury under buildings and balance sheets and the relentless pursuit of more. "Corwin, I need..." Her voice broke. Shattered, became something jagged and desperate that he'd never heard from her before. Not even at the end, not even when she'd handed him those separation papers and walked out of his life. Something terrible has happened. The Austin plans blurred in front of him. The office around him faded to meaningless background noise. Everything that had mattered 5 seconds ago, the meetings, the timelines, the empire, became nothing. "Sarin, what is it? What's wrong?" He could hear her trying to control her breathing, failing, the sound of a mother breaking apart one syllable at a time. "I need you. God, Corwin, I need you. They need you. I'm so sorry. I should have told you years ago, but I was hurt and angry, and then my mother got sick and..." "Sarin, slow down. Tell me what's happened." A sob, a breath, a sentence that would change everything. "They're gone. They're gone." She was crying now, barely able to form words, the voice of a woman at the end of her capacity, held together by nothing but the desperate need to communicate. "Our daughters. Someone took our daughters." The sentence didn't make sense. It was a collection of sounds that refused to assemble into meaning, words he understood individually that became impossible when combined. What daughters? Silence. Just long enough for the question to reveal everything he didn't know. Twins, Corwin, Luna and Briar. They're 7 years old, and they have your eyes and someone took them, and I don't know where they are, and... A sob swallowed the rest, and in that moment, math happened automatically in his brain. 8 years since the divorce. 7-year-old children. She was pregnant when she left. She was pregnant, and he didn't know, and she'd raised them alone for... "What do you mean, someone took them?" His voice came from somewhere outside himself, a voice that sounded calm while everything inside him collapsed. From school. She forced herself to breathe, to be coherent. Someone signed them out early this afternoon. A woman, she used my name, had all the documentation, my signature, forged ID, everything. The office didn't verify because she looked similar enough and everything seemed legitimate. She? Dark hair, similar features, everything. The secretary said she looked like me. It was planned, Corwin. Whoever took them had been planning this for a long time. They knew exactly how to impersonate me. They knew our routines. They knew which office staff would be working today. They knew everything. His daughters. He had daughters. They existed. They'd existed for 7 years. 2 little girls with Sarin's smile and his eyes, and someone had taken them, and he didn't even know they were alive until this moment. The police? Won't tell me anything. Desperation cracked her voice. They're treating me like a suspect because how do I explain that their billionaire father didn't know they existed? How do I explain 8 years of silence? They think I'm hiding something. They think this might be a custody dispute that got out of hand. They think, where are you? Portland. I'll text you the address. Don't call anyone else. Don't talk to the police without a lawyer. Don't let them separate you from the investigation. Corwin, I'm so sorry. The words tumbled out. I should have told you. I was going to tell you, I really was. But then my mother got sick with cancer, and I moved here to take care of her, and by the time she died, the girls were 4, and I didn't know how to explain why I'd waited so long and… Sarin, he cut her off, his voice steadier than he felt. We'll deal with all of that later. Every question, every explanation, every piece of this that doesn't make sense. But right now, I'm coming to get you, and we're going to find our daughters. You believe me? The question broke something inside him. That she had to ask, that she expected him to doubt her, even now. I'll be there in 4 hours. Corwin? 4 hours, just hold on. He hung up before she could respond, before she could tell him more, before the weight of what he'd just learned could fully settle on his shoulders. He had daughters. The thought kept repeating, looking for a place to land. He had daughters, and they were gone. His hands were shaking. Corwin Ashford, who shook hands with presidents, who closed billion-dollar deals without blinking, who built an empire on steadiness and control and the absolute certainty that nothing could unsettle him. He was trembling like a child. He had daughters, twin girls named Luna and Briar, 7 years old. His eyes gone. The Austin plans scattered as he stood. The chair rolled back and hit the bookshelf. He was already moving toward the door, his body operating on autopilot, while his mind struggled to process the impossible. Cancel everything. His assistant looked up, startled. In 12 years of working for him, she had never seen this expression on his face, never heard this tone in his voice. Mr. Ashford, the Seattle contractors are expecting… Clear it all. Sir, the Pacific Northwest expansion depends on… Clear it all. She went silent. Something in his eyes told her not to argue, not to question, not to do anything except exactly what he demanded. How long will you be unavailable? Indefinitely. He was already past her desk, already in the hallway, already calling his pilot, his security team, his fixer, the man who made impossible things possible for clients with enough money to pay for miracles. I need the jet ready in 30 minutes, Portland, and I need you to activate every contact we have in the Pacific Northwest, private investigators, security consultants, former law enforcement, anyone who can help find 2 missing children. Sir, what's the situation? My daughters have been kidnapped. A pause on the other end. You have daughters? I do now. 30 minutes. Don't make me wait. He hung up, kept moving. Every step took him closer to the jet, to Portland, to Sarin, to a crisis he'd never prepared for and children he'd never held. Someone had taken his family. That someone was about to understand what a very expensive mistake they had made. 4 hours in the air felt like 4 years. The private jet cut through clouds at 40,000 feet, carrying Corwin toward a future he couldn't have imagined 24 hours ago. Below him, the country scrolled past in meaningless patches of green and brown and grey. He tried to process the information, organize it, understand it. Twins, Luna and Briar, names he'd never heard until 90 minutes ago. faces he'd never seen, voices he'd never heard. 7 years of birthday parties and first steps and bedtime stories, all of it happening without him, all of it stolen before he could even begin to understand what he'd lost. Sarin had been pregnant when she left, or discovered the pregnancy shortly after. The timeline didn't matter. What mattered was that she'd made the decision alone, to keep them, to raise them, to never tell him they existed. He could be angry. He had every right to be angry. 8 years of lies, 8 years of secrets, 8 years of his daughters growing up without a father because their mother decided he wasn't worthy of the information. But anger felt hollow compared to terror. Someone had taken them, someone who had planned this carefully, someone with resources and access and very specific knowledge of Sarin's routines, her appearance, her vulnerabilities. This wasn't random. This was targeted. His phone lit up with reports from his security team, financial records accessed, flight manifests examined, every piece of information that money could buy, purchased and analyzed in real time. Nothing yet, but they were looking, and through all of it, something else woke up inside him. Something ancient, something unfamiliar. A protective instinct he didn't know he possessed, roaring to life for daughters he'd never held, never met, never knew existed until 90 minutes ago. This is what fatherhood feels like, he realized. Not gradual, not earned through midnight feedings and scraped knees and school plays. Sometimes it arrived all at once, fully formed, in a moment of crisis that stripped everything else away. He thought about the empire he'd built, the buildings with his name on them, the magazine covers, the billion-dollar valuations. All of it suddenly felt like children's toys. Elaborate distractions from what actually mattered. He would burn it all down to get them back. Every building, every partnership, every dollar in every account. None of it mattered compared to 2 little girls with his eyes and their mother's smile. The jet began its descent. Portland appeared below him, a city of bridges and rain, and the modest home where Sarin had raised their daughters alone for 7 years. He didn't know what he would find there, didn't know if he could help, didn't know if she would even want him there after everything that had happened between them. But he was coming anyway, because they were his daughters, and whoever had taken them was about to discover what happened when you threatened something that belonged to Corwin Ashford. You know what's fascinating about crisis? It reveals who we really are. All those years, Corwin had been telling himself he was a builder, a businessman, a brand. He measured his worth in square footage and profit margins and magazine covers. He defined success by the size of his empire and the sound of his name in other people's mouths. But the moment he learned his daughters were in danger, every single one of those measurements became meaningless. He didn't think about contracts, didn't worry about the Seattle contractors, didn't calculate the cost of dropping everything and flying across the country for a woman who had kept his children's secret for 8 years. He just moved. Because something primal had woken up inside him, something deeper than ambition, something more powerful than fear. A father's instinct, emerging fully formed in a man who'd never held his own children. And that something? It was going to burn down anyone who stood between him and those little girls. Money built his empire. But love was about to save his family. The address led to a neighborhood full of old trees and tricycles and homes that looked lived in rather than displayed. Sarin's house was modest. Blue shutters, a garden that someone obviously tended with care, toys visible through the front window, evidence of the lives he'd missed. A swing set in the backyard, one swing moving slightly in the breeze as if recently abandoned. Not the kind of place a billionaire's ex-wife might be expected to live. But Sarin had never been a billionaire's anything. She'd just been a woman who loved a man who couldn't love her back the right way. His driver pulled to the curb. Corwin was out of the car before it fully stopped, moving up the walkway with a purpose that felt like the only thing keeping him upright. The door opened before he could knock. 8 years had changed her, deepened the lines around her eyes, sharpened the angles of her face, added threads of silver to her dark hair. But her eyes were the same, grey-green like fog over coastal water, filled now with a terror that seemed bottomless. "You came," she whispered. "Where else would I be?" And then, without thinking, without planning, without any of the careful distance he'd maintained for 8 years. He pulled her into his arms. She collapsed against him like she'd been holding herself together by willpower alone, and finally found something strong enough to lean on. Her whole body shook with sobs she'd been suppressing since she first discovered the girls were missing. "I'm sorry," she kept repeating into his chest. "I'm so sorry. I should have told you. I should have told you the moment I found out I was pregnant. I should have called you when they were born. I should have—" "Later." He held her tighter, his chin resting on top of her head. "We'll deal with all of it later. Every explanation, every apology, every piece of the last 8 years that doesn't make sense. You must hate me. I could never hate you." She pulled back, searching his face for the lie, finding none. "But I kept your children from you. For 8 years, I robbed you of knowing them, watching them grow, being their father. And I robbed you of a husband who showed up, who chose you, who fought for what mattered." His hands were still on her shoulders. "We've both made mistakes, Sarin, but right now, none of that matters. Right now, I need you to tell me exactly what happened, everything you know, every detail, no matter how small." She wiped her eyes, nodded, led him inside, and Corwin Ashford stepped into the home where his daughters had grown up, a home filled with evidence of lives he'd missed, choices he'd made wrong, and love that had somehow survived despite everything he'd done to destroy it. Inside, evidence of the lives he'd missed surrounded him. Photographs covered every surface. 2 identical girls with Sarin's smile and his eyes, captured at every stage of growth. Birthday parties with pink and purple streamers. Beach vacations with sandy faces and enormous grins. School portraits with missing teeth and proud smiles. Halloween costumes, bees one year, astronauts another, scientists the next. He picked up a frame from the mantel. The girls couldn't have been more than 4 years old, dressed in matching lab coats that were clearly homemade, holding beakers filled with colored water. "That was Luna's idea," Sarin said quietly, her voice still raw from crying. "She wanted to be a scientist for Halloween. Briar wanted to be a ballerina, but Luna convinced her that scientists were cooler because they discover how things work." Luna, his daughter's name, a person he'd never met, a life he'd never touched. Crayon drawings were taped to the refrigerator. 2 suns, 2 stick figures labeled Me and Sissy. 2 hearts, colored carefully pink and red. A house with 4 windows and a door, and only 3 people standing in front of it. No father. Not even a space where one might have been. Small backpacks hung on hooks by the door, one pink with stars, one purple with planets. Tiny shoes lined up underneath. A stuffed elephant lay abandoned on the couch, clearly well loved, its fur worn thin in patches where small hands had gripped it for comfort. He picked up the elephant. "What's this?" "Ellie," Sarin's voice broke. "Luna won't sleep without her. She's had that elephant since she was 2. Got it at the zoo on a day when Briar was sick and couldn't come, and she felt so guilty for having fun without her sister that she made me buy 2 elephants so Briar could have one too. But Briar named hers something else, and—" She stopped, pressed her hand to her mouth. "Luna must be so scared right now. She doesn't have Ellie. She doesn't have her sister. She doesn't have me." Something cracked open inside him. These weren't abstract children. These were real people. Real girls with favorite stuffed animals and crayon drawings and complicated sister dynamics. His daughters. 7 years of their lives he would never get back. And now someone had taken even the present from him. "Tell me everything," he said. "From the beginning, every detail. Family, I need you to pause with me here. This man just discovered he has daughters, and in the same breath, learned they've been stolen. The life he thought he knew has completely shattered in a matter of hours. And now he's standing in a house full of memories he was never part of, looking at evidence of children he never knew existed. If this story is hitting you in your heart right now, drop a comment below. Tell me what you're feeling. Tell me what you would do in this moment. Would you be able to function? Would you break down? Would you be angry at the mother who kept this secret? And if someone you know needs to hear this story, Someone who's chosen ambition over family, someone who's let manipulation destroy their relationships, someone who needs to know it's never too late to change. Share this video with them. Sometimes the stories that break us are the ones that save us. Sarin walked him through the details with the clinical precision of a trauma nurse reporting to a doctor. Facts, timeline, observable data. The only way she could discuss the worst day of her life without completely falling apart. School lets out at 3:15. I usually pick them up myself, but Tuesdays I work until 4, so they go to aftercare. The secretary knows this. Everyone knows this. It's been our routine for 2 years. She showed him her phone. Text messages from the school, time-stamped at 1:47 p.m. Mrs. Ashford, just confirming you picked up Luna and Briar early today. They seemed excited about the surprise. Hope everything's okay. Sarin had been in surgery when the text came through. Didn't see it until 3:30, when she was scrubbing out. I called the school immediately. The secretary said a woman who looked like me, dark hair, similar build, my mannerisms, had come in at 1:30 with a doctor's note saying both girls had appointments. She had forged identification with my name, a forged signature on the sign-out sheet that looked exactly like mine. Did they have security footage? Oh, yes, I've seen it. Sarin pulled up a video file on her laptop. The police have the original, but I made them send me a copy. She pressed play. The footage showed a woman in a dark coat entering the school office. Her face was partially obscured by sunglasses and a scarf, but the resemblance to Sarin was undeniable. Same height, same build, same way of moving. She knew exactly what to say. Sarin continued, her voice hollow, told the secretary that the girl's pediatrician had called about their vaccination records needing updating. Said we had an appointment across town and traffic was terrible, so she needed to get them now or we'd be late. The secretary didn't even question it. Where's the footage from outside? Parking lot? Street cameras? The school's outdoor cameras were malfunctioning. Have been for 2 weeks. The police think whoever did this may have sabotaged them in advance. Corwin's jaw clenched. Premeditation. Planning. Someone who knew the school's security weaknesses. Someone who had been watching for a long time. The police have issued an Amber Alert. They're checking traffic cameras within a 5-mile radius. But it's been... She checked her phone. 7 hours. They could be anywhere by now. 7 hours. In 7 hours you could drive to another state, board a private plane, disappear completely. Who knew about them? Corwin asked, who knew you had daughters? Almost no one outside of Portland. My mother, but she died 2 years ago. Hospital colleagues, their teachers, a few friends here. Who else might have been keeping track of you? Who else knew about us? The question hung in the air. Then, simultaneously, they both arrived at the same terrible conclusion. Rosalind, he called his mother from Sarin's living room. His hands were steady now. The panic had transformed into something colder, something more dangerous. The focused rage of a man who had finally identified his enemy. Rosalind answered on the second ring. Corwin, what a pleasant surprise. I thought you were too busy conquering the Austin market to call your aging mother. Where are they? Silence, just long enough to confirm everything. Where are who, darling? My daughters, Luna and Briar. He let the names land. Let her hear them spoken aloud for the first time in his voice. The children you've apparently known about for 7 years. The children who were taken from their school today by someone who looked exactly like their mother. Another silence, colder this time, more calculated. Daughters? You don't have any daughters. Your marriage was childless. We both made sure of... She stopped abruptly. We both made sure of what, mother? I misspoke. You never misspeak. His voice was ice. You never say anything that isn't calculated 3 moves ahead. You've been playing chess with my life since I was old enough to walk, so don't insult my intelligence by pretending this is news to you. Corwin, you drove Sarin away. You hired Emberlyn to replace her. You sent those photographs. You had the divorce papers prepared before Sarin even confronted me. And now, what? You've taken my children? Your own grandchildren? Why? The mask slipped. Just for a moment. Just enough to reveal something desperate underneath. Because they're not supposed to exist. Her voice rose, lost its careful control. That woman was supposed to leave and stay gone. She was supposed to disappear and let you become what you were meant to be, not trap you with domestic obligations and hospital salaries and children who would drag you back down to, "Where are my daughters?" He'd never screamed at his mother before. In 34 years of life, under her careful management, he had never raised his voice to Rosalind Ashford. The sound shocked them both into silence. When she spoke again, her voice was different, smaller, almost frightened. "I don't have them. Why should I believe you?" "Because I'm not a monster." The desperation was real now, unfiltered. "I wanted what was best for you. I wanted to protect your future. I wanted you to have the life your father's failures almost stole from you. But those are my grandchildren. I would never harm them. I would never—" "You destroyed my marriage. You manipulated me for decades. You orchestrated the worst decision of my life. Why would kidnapping be beyond you?" "Because kidnapping serves no purpose." Rosalind's voice steadied slightly. The strategist, reasserting control. "If I wanted those children removed from your life, I would simply ensure you never knew they existed, which until today was precisely the case. Why would I bring them to your attention by having them abducted?" The logic was cold, calculating, cruel, but it was also undeniable. Then, who took them? Silence stretched across the phone line. When Rosalind spoke again, something in her tone had shifted completely. "There's something I haven't told you, about Sarin's family. Her father." Corwin's blood ran cold. Matthias Calloway. Sarin rarely mentioned her father. In 3 years of marriage, she'd spoken of him maybe twice. Brief references followed by a change of subject. Pain she didn't want to revisit. "He left when I was young," she'd said once. "Started a new family somewhere else. Not worth the words to describe him." Corwin had accepted this. Everyone had painful family histories. He'd never pushed. Now Rosalind's voice filled in the gaps he'd never known existed. The story her mother told wasn't complete. Matthias Calloway wasn't just an absent father. He was investigated for financial crimes when Sarin was 6 years old. Securities fraud, embezzlement, a network of shell companies that collapsed and took hundreds of investors down with it. "I don't see how this—" He fled to South America before he could be charged. Argentina, specifically, Buenos Aires. He's been running legitimate businesses there for 30 years, building a new empire, a new life. Rosalind paused. A new family. Why does this matter now? Because 3 months ago, my investigators noticed something unusual. Matthias Calloway returned to the United States. He's been in the country for 12 weeks, flying under the radar, but he's here. The air in Sarin's living room seemed to thicken. Corwin met her eyes. She was listening to his half of the conversation, her face growing paler with each passing moment. "And from what I've gathered," Rosalind continued, "he's become obsessed in his old age, obsessed with family legacy, with correcting old mistakes, with the grandchildren from his first family, the family he abandoned. He's never met Luna and Briar." Exactly. The pieces connected in Corwin's mind. Horrible, impossible, a different villain than he'd expected. "You're saying he took them?" "I'm saying it's possible. The woman who impersonated Sarin, it could have been his current wife, his daughter from the second family, someone who researched Sarin's appearance, her mannerisms, her routines, someone with resources to forge documents and plan an operation this sophisticated. But why kidnap them? Why not just reach out, request visitation? Because Matthias Calloway is dying. Rosalind's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Terminal cancer, advanced stage, months to live if that. And a man facing death does desperate things. He might not be looking for ransom or leverage, Corwin. The floor shifted beneath his feet. He might be looking to keep them. A grandfather meeting his grandchildren for the first time, claiming them, creating the legacy he'd destroyed decades ago, taking them to a country with no extradition treaty, where money could buy protection and silence. This wasn't about money. This was about possession, about a dying man's final attempt to correct his mistakes by creating new ones. Sarin had gone completely white. My father is here, in the United States. Corwin covered the phone. You didn't know? I haven't spoken to him in 28 years. I didn't even know if he was still alive. Sometimes the monster isn't who you think. Corwin had spent years resenting his mother, and don't get me wrong, Rosalind earned that resentment. She manipulated and controlled and destroyed. She drove away the woman he loved and never showed a moment of remorse. But while he was focused on her, a different predator had been circling, someone from Sarin's past, someone nobody had thought to fear, someone who'd been watching from the shadows for 30 years, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Matthias Calloway, a name Sarin barely spoke. A father who had abandoned her at 6 years old and never looked back. A man who destroyed hundreds of lives with his fraud and fled to rebuild in a country that wouldn't prosecute him. Now he wanted his granddaughters, and a dying man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous kind of enemy, because he doesn't care about consequences, doesn't worry about getting caught, doesn't think about tomorrow. Because he doesn't have one, he only cares about what he wants. And right now what he wanted was Luna and Briar, two little girls who had no idea their grandfather even existed, who were being taken by a stranger who claimed to be family, who were probably terrified, confused, crying for their mother. The clock was ticking, and Corwin was about to learn that money can accelerate justice, but it can't guarantee it. Money, it turns out, can accelerate justice when applied correctly. Corwin's security team worked through the night. Every resource he'd accumulated over 2 decades of building an empire was redirected toward a single purpose, finding Luna and Briar. Within 3 hours, they tracked unusual activity around a private airfield outside Portland. A chartered plane had filed a flight plan to Vancouver, then cancelled it at the last minute. The passenger manifest listed names that didn't match any existing records, obvious aliases. Within 6 hours, they identified a private jet registered to a shell company with ties to Buenos Aires. The corporate structure was deliberately obscured, layered through 7 different holding companies across 4 countries. But money could peel back those layers. Within 12 hours, they knew the jet hadn't left the country. It had landed at a small municipal airport in rural Oregon 2 hours south of Portland. Within 18 hours, they had a location, a compound in the Cascade foothills. 40 acres of forested property, heavily gated, registered to a trust that, after 7 layers of corporate obscurity, traced back to Matthias Calloway. We should call the FBI, Sarin said, staring at satellite images on a laptop screen. Her voice was hoarse from crying, from not sleeping, from 18 hours of helplessness. We will, but first, I need to make a call. He dialed Rosalind's number. The words that came out of his mouth cost him more than he expected. I need your help. Silence on the other end. Then, quietly, anything. Call in every favor you've ever accumulated, every politician who owes you, every judge who's played golf at your country club, every law enforcement contact you've cultivated over 30 years of being Rosalind Ashford. What do you need? I need that compound surrounded by tactical teams before Matthias can move those girls anywhere else. I need warrants signed and operations authorized and every legal protection in place to make sure my daughters come home safely. Consider it done. And, Mother? Yes? After this is over, we're going to have a very long conversation about everything you've done, about the manipulation and the photographs and the divorce you engineered, and you're going to tell me the truth, all of it. Silence stretched between them. Then, quietly, I know. 2 hours later, the FBI's hostage rescue team was mobilizing. Rosalind Ashford, it turned out, had friends in very high places. The raid was scheduled for the hour when human alertness drops to its lowest point, when guards grow drowsy and response times slow, when the difference between success and failure can be measured in seconds. Corwin wasn't supposed to be there. FBI jurisdiction, civilian involvement strictly prohibited. Every rule and protocol designed to keep people like him far from operations like this. But he'd spent 8 years not being there for his children. He wasn't about to start their rescue the same way. The FBI command vehicle was cramped and filled with screens showing different angles of the compound. Thermal imaging revealed heat signatures, guards on patrol, figures inside the main building, and two small shapes in a room on the second floor. His daughters, alive, visible on a screen in infrared. He could barely breathe. Sarin sat beside him, her hand finding his somewhere in the darkness. Neither of them let go. "I should have told you," she whispered for the 100th time. "The moment I found out I was pregnant, I should have called." "Why didn't you?" "Because I was angry. Because your mother had just sent me photographs of you laughing with another woman. Because I thought if you knew about the babies you'd want them, but you wouldn't want me." She paused, and her voice cracked. "And I couldn't bear to share them with someone who saw me as an obligation, who might do to them what you did to me, be there but not present, accounted for but not available." "I never saw you as an obligation." "Didn't you?" She turned to face him, and in the glow of the monitors her eyes held 8 years of accumulated questions. "At the end, Corwin, when you signed those papers, did you fight? Did you ask me to stay? Did you do anything except let me walk away?" The truth sat in his throat like broken glass. "I was scared," he admitted. The words felt like confession, like penance. "You were right about everything. The absence, the distance, the way I'd let our marriage become something I returned to instead of something I lived in. And instead of facing that fear, I let my pride make the choice. I told myself you'd be better off, that I was doing you a favor by letting you go. That wasn't your decision to make. I know that now. I've known it for 8 years. He squeezed her hand. "Every building I raised after you left felt empty. Every success felt hollow. I told myself I was creating a legacy, but legacies don't matter if there's no one to share them with. I've been waiting for something my whole life, Sarin, and I didn't realize until today that what I was waiting for was already gone. That I'd let it walk out the door without fighting because I was too scared to admit I needed it." She opened her mouth to respond. The radio crackled. "All teams in position. We have visual confirmation on the children, preparing for breach." Every muscle in Corwin's body tensed. Sarin's hand tightened around his until the bones ached. "Stand by for execution." The screens showed tactical teams moving into position, dark figures against darker backgrounds, the night holding its breath. "They're high," Sarin breathed. "They're actually alive." Entry in 30 seconds. Corwin had built skyscrapers, negotiated billion-dollar deals, faced down competitors and critics and every challenge the business world could throw at him. None of it compared to this. None of it came close to the terror of watching strangers risk their lives to save children he'd never held. 20 seconds. "Please," he heard himself whisper. He didn't know who he was asking, didn't care. "Please, let them be safe." 10 seconds. "Breach in 5, 4, 3. Breach, breach, breach." The screens erupted with motion. Flashbang detonations lit up the monitors in white bursts. Shouted commands crackled through the radio. Dark figures poured through doorways with precision and purpose. Every movement coordinated. Every second counted. Corwin and Sarin watched in frozen silence as the tactical teams swept through the compound, room by room, floor by floor, calling out clearances and moving forward with relentless efficiency. Main level secured, moving to second floor. His heart pounded so hard he could feel it in his throat. Sarin had stopped breathing entirely. He could see her holding everything inside, afraid that exhaling would break some cosmic spell that was keeping their daughters safe. Second floor accessed, multiple contacts, engaging. Muffled sounds through the radio. A scuffle, someone shouting in Spanish, the sharp crack of a door being forced open. Then silence. Endless, impossible silence. 3 seconds that lasted 3 centuries. "Children secured." The words came through the radio like oxygen to a drowning man. 2 females, approximately 7 years old, unharmed. "Repeat, the children are safe. We have the children, and they are safe." Sarin collapsed against him. Her entire body gave way at once, 8 years of strength finally breaking now that she had permission to break. She sobbed into his chest with a sound that was half grief and half relief, the accumulated weight of fear and guilt and desperate hope pouring out in the cramped darkness of that command vehicle. Corwin held her, while his own tears fell unchecked. He didn't try to hide them, didn't try to maintain the composure that had defined his professional life for 2 decades. He just let himself feel it. The overwhelming gratitude, the bone-deep relief, the sudden understanding of what actually mattered. His daughters were safe. His family was coming home. Suspect in custody. Matthias Calloway apprehended without incident. 2 additional suspects detained, identified as Calloway's current wife and adult daughter from his second marriage. The old man hadn't fought. According to the reports that would come later, he'd simply looked at the tactical teams with something like resignation, like he'd known this moment was coming, and had made his peace with it. He'd wanted to meet his granddaughters one more time before he died. Wanted to take something with him into the darkness. Wanted to create the family legacy his crimes had destroyed. But Luna and Briar weren't his to take. Medical teams requesting access. Children appear physically unharmed, but requesting evaluation. Granted. Bring them out. Corwin and Sarin watched the screens as 2 small figures were carried from the compound, wrapped in emergency blankets, surrounded by protective strangers, moving toward the light, alive. The nightmare was over. Now the harder work began. There are moments that break you, and then there are moments that remake you. Waiting in that command vehicle, watching strangers risk their lives for children he'd never held, Corwin Ashford understood something he'd been running from his entire adult life. Family isn't something you build like a skyscraper. It isn't blueprints and timelines and measurable outcomes. It isn't strategic partnerships and calculated risks and return on investment. Family is something you show up for, day after day, choice after choice, present and available and willing to be changed by the people you love. He'd spent 8 years building monuments that didn't matter, collecting achievements that couldn't hold him, proving his worth to a world that didn't need proof. Now he had a chance to build something that actually mattered. 2 little girls who needed a father, a woman who deserved a partner who would stay, a second chance he'd never expected, and definitely didn't deserve. The question was, would he take it? Would he be brave enough this time to choose presence over achievement? To choose vulnerability over walls? To choose love over the fear that had been driving him since he was 9 years old, hiding behind a couch? The answer was walking toward him right now, wrapped in emergency blankets, with his eyes and their mother's smile. 24 hours after the raid, a hospital room in Portland, standard issue, fluorescent lights and antiseptic smell, and the particular hush of spaces designed for healing. The FBI had insisted on medical evaluations, psychological assessments, all the protocols required when children were recovered from abduction. Matthias Calloway sat in federal custody awaiting arraignment on kidnapping charges and a lifetime of other crimes that had finally caught up with him. But none of that mattered right now. The door opened, and 2 small girls walked in. They were identical, dark hair pulled back in messy ponytails, pointed chins, eyes exactly the shade of grey he saw in the mirror every morning. They wore matching hospital gowns that were too big, their small hands clutching the stuffed elephant and a purple bear that someone had given them. They held hands as they entered, a united front against a world that had just tried to take them from everything they knew. Luna and Briar, his daughters, 7 years of their lives, compressed into a single moment of meeting. Sarin dropped to her knees, arms open wide. My babies, my brave, brave girls. They ran to her with the particular desperation of children who had been terrified and were now safe, all 3 of them crying and laughing and holding each other. A mother reunited with her children, a family made temporarily whole. Corwin stood frozen by the door, an intruder at a reunion he hadn't earned, a father in name only, watching from the outside of a bond he had no right to claim. He had never held these girls, never sung them to sleep, never bandaged their scraped knees, or answered their midnight questions, or done any of the 1,000 small things that made someone a parent. He was a stranger who shared their DNA, nothing more. Then one of the girls, Luna, he would learn later, looked up from her mother's shoulder. Her eyes found his across the hospital room, and she studied him with unsettling intensity. 7 years old, with the assessing gaze of someone much older. Already he could see himself in her. The way she calculated, considered, refused to accept easy answers. "Mummy," she said, her voice clear despite everything she'd been through. "Is that our daddy?" Sarin pulled back, wiping her eyes. "Yes, baby. That's your daddy. He came to help find you. He flew all the way from Chicago the moment I told him you were missing." Luna extracted herself from the embrace and walked toward him, slowly, deliberately, each step a choice. She stopped 3 feet away, close enough to see him clearly, far enough to maintain distance. "You weren't here before," she said, not accusingly, just factually, a child stating what she observed. "In the pictures, or at Christmas, or when Briar broke her arm falling off the swing." The words hit him like stones. Each one true, each one deserved. "No." Corwin's voice came out rough. "I wasn't, but I didn't know you existed. Your mummy and I. We had a fight a long time ago, before you were born, and I didn't know about you until yesterday." She processed this with the seriousness of a judge hearing testimony. Then she looked back at her sister, still wrapped in Sarin's arms. Some twin communication passed between them. A whole conversation in a single glance, a language only they understood, developed over 7 years of shared experience. Finally, Luna turned back to him. "Briar says you have to prove it first." Her voice was firm. "Final, words are easy. Anyone can say words. But Mummy says what matters is what you do, not what you say." "Briar's right," he agreed, kneeling to her level so their eyes met directly. "I do have to prove it, and I will, every single day, for as long as you'll let me." Luna stepped closer, close enough to reach out and touch his face with one small hand. Her palm was warm against his cheek, her grey eyes searching his with an intensity that made him feel completely exposed. "You have sad eyes," she said slowly, "like you missed us, even when you didn't know we were missing." Something cracked open inside his chest, something that had been frozen for 8 years, maybe longer. "I did," he managed. "I just didn't know what I was missing." "That's okay." She smiled, Sarin's smile, on a face that was somehow entirely his. "You can learn. Mummy says everyone makes mistakes, but the brave ones learn from them. Your mummy's very wise." "I know." She looked back at Sarin, then at her sister, then back to him. "Can we keep him, Mummy?" Through tears, Sarin laughed. "We'll see, baby. We'll see." Recovery took time. Healing took longer. Matthias Calloway was sentenced to 25 years for kidnapping, conspiracy, and a litany of financial crimes that emerged during the investigation. He'd wanted to collect his granddaughters, create a legacy before he died, start fresh with a family he could control. The banality of his obsession made it somehow more horrifying. His wife and daughter from the second family received lighter sentences in exchange for cooperation. They'd been manipulated by a dying man's desperate fantasy, believing they were helping him achieve peace before the end. Matthias died in prison 3 months after sentencing. The cancer that had driven his desperation finally consumed him. The girls never asked about him. Corwin and Rosalind had the conversation he'd promised. It lasted 3 days, spread across a week, held in neutral territory, a conference room in a downtown hotel where neither of them had the advantage. She admitted everything, the manipulation, the photographs staged to look more intimate than they were. The divorce lawyers prepared in advance and recommended to Sarin at precisely the right moment. The investigators she'd paid to track Sarin for years, confirming the existence of the twins but keeping that information to herself. "I thought I was saving you," she said on the 3rd day. And for the first time in his life, Corwin saw his mother cry. Real tears. Not calculated. Not performed. "Your father almost destroyed us with his weakness. I couldn't let love do the same thing to you." "Love didn't destroy Dad," Corwin replied quietly. "Addiction did. Running from his pain did. Fear did. You never taught me the difference between healthy love and destructive dependence. You just taught me to avoid all of it. I was wrong." 2 words Rosalind Ashford had never spoken in his presence. Yes, you were. He didn't forgive her. Not immediately. Not easily. Forgiveness, he was learning, wasn't a single decision, but a process that took time. But he allowed her to meet her granddaughters. Supervised visits, controlled environments, in small doses that could be adjusted based on behavior. Luna approached her grandmother with suspicion, testing boundaries with the same intensity she tested Corwin. "Did you hurt my mummy?" Rosalind looked at this 7-year-old child who refused to accept anything less than truth and made a choice. "Yes, I did. And I'm very sorry." Sorry isn't enough. You have to prove it. "You're right. I do." Briar was gentler, more willing to see possibility in new connections. She showed Rosalind her drawings, asked questions about Corwin when he was little, built bridges where Luna built walls. Between them, they taught their grandmother something she'd never learned, that control and love are not the same thing. Rosalind, for once in her life, let someone else set the terms. She showed up when invited, left when asked, followed rules she hadn't written. It was, perhaps, the first genuinely selfless thing she'd done in decades. Progress, slow and imperfect and painful, but progress nonetheless. Corwin and Sarin rebuilt even more slowly. They didn't jump back into a relationship, didn't pretend the past 8 years hadn't happened, didn't try to recapture what they'd lost. Instead, they started over. They dated, actually dated, with dinners at restaurants and conversations that lasted for hours and the deliberate intention of learning who they'd become in 8 years apart. He'd grown, she'd grown. They were different people now, shaped by different experiences, carrying different scars. "I'm not the woman you married," Sarin told him on their 3rd official date. That woman was younger, more willing to accommodate, more willing to wait. "Good," he replied. "I don't want you to accommodate or wait. I want you to demand what you need, and I want to be someone capable of giving it." He bought a house in Portland, not a penthouse, not something ostentatious, a real home in a neighborhood with sidewalks and trees and children playing in yards, close to Sarin's house but not intrusive, a place the girls could visit, could decorate, could claim as partly theirs. He let them choose the color of their bedroom walls. Luna wanted deep blue like the ocean at night. Briar wanted sunset orange. He painted them both, himself, taking his time, doing it right. He started shifting Ashford development toward projects that actually mattered. Affordable housing, community centers, schools in underserved neighborhoods. The kind of work that had first brought him and Sarin together in a hospital chapel at 3mm. The magazine covers stopped mattering. The billion-dollar valuations became background noise. What mattered now was smaller, quieter, more easily measured in bedtime stories and kept promises than in square footage and profit margins. The girls warmed to him gradually. Luna remained skeptical for months, testing his commitment with the persistence of someone who'd learned not to trust easily. She'd ask him questions designed to catch him in lies, set expectations. She expected him to fail. Watch him constantly for signs that he was about to disappear. "Are you coming to my school play?" "Yes." "What if you have a meeting?" "I'll cancel it." "What if it's important?" "Nothing is more important than being there when I say I will be." She'd narrow her eyes, test him, and when he showed up, every single time, she'd give him a small nod. One test passed, 1,000 more to go. Briar was gentler, more willing to believe in second chances. She'd climb into his lap during movie nights, ask him to read bedtime stories in different voices, draw pictures of our family that included him without hesitation. Between them, they taught him how to be a father. Luna taught him accountability. Briar taught him grace, and together, slowly, they built something that felt like home. Rebuilding trust isn't a grand gesture. It's not a single dramatic moment where everything is forgiven and forgotten. It's not a movie-style reconciliation with swelling music and tears and everything suddenly okay. It's 1,000 small choices. It's showing up when you said you would, even when it's inconvenient. It's asking questions and actually remembering the answers. It's proving every single day that this time is different, that you've learned, that you've changed, that the person who hurt them before isn't the person standing in front of them now. Corwin had spent his whole life thinking that the big achievements mattered. The skyscrapers, the billion-dollar deals, the magazine covers and industry awards and all the external validation he could accumulate. Now he was learning that the small moments matter more. A bedtime story read with all the voices, even when you're exhausted. A promise kept, even when breaking it would be easier. Being there when no one's watching, when there's no credit to claim, when the only reward is a small hand reaching for yours in the dark. That's what builds a family that lasts. Not monuments, not achievements, not empire, presence. Every single day. Through the boring parts, through the hard parts, through the moments when there's nothing exciting happening and you show up anyway because that's what love actually is. Corwin was finally learning what Sarin had tried to teach him 8 years ago. And this time, he was paying attention. 2 years after the abduction, they were standing on the same Lake Michigan pier where they'd exchanged their first vows. The water crashed against the stones behind them, the same rhythm it had followed for centuries. The same city glittered in the distance, but everything else was different. This time, Luna and Briar stood beside them, matching dresses they'd chosen themselves after 3 shopping trips and considerable debate. Flowers from a garden they'd planted together as a family. 9 years old now, with their father's determination and their mother's grace, and the particular confidence of children who know they are completely loved. "I know I don't deserve another chance," Corwin said, holding Sarin's hands in his. "I know I failed you before. I know 2 years of presence can't erase 8 years of absence." "Corwin, let me finish." He squeezed her hands. "I've spent the last 2 years trying to become someone worthy of this family, not the man I was, not the man my mother raised me to be, someone better, someone who shows up, someone who chooses you, all 3 of you, over everything else, every single day." He pulled out a ring, simple, elegant, nothing like the ostentatious diamond he'd given her the first time. "I'm not asking you to forget what happened. I'm asking for the chance to keep building what we've started, something better than we had before. Something that lasts because it's built on truth instead of fantasy." Sarin smiled, that same smile from a hospital chapel at 3 a.m. when a stranger sat beside him in his darkest hour and offered terrible coffee and the possibility of redemption. "You've already been building it," she said. "Every night you stayed for bedtime stories, every promise you kept, every time you put us first. You've been building home, Corwin, and I've been living in it. We all have." "Is that a yes?" "That's a yes." Luna cheered. Briar threw flower petals that the wind caught and scattered. And somewhere in the distance, a city full of skyscrapers glittered in the fading light, monuments to ambition that finally had a purpose. Rosalind walked him down the aisle, a gesture of reconciliation that surprised everyone, including her. She'd spent 2 years in therapy, facing demons she'd spent a lifetime creating, learning, for the first time, how to love without controlling, how to protect without manipulating, how to be a mother instead of a strategist. The woman who met her granddaughters now wasn't the woman who had destroyed her son's first marriage. Change, it turned out, was possible, even for those who'd built their lives on control and fear. Marcus, the old lawyer, served as best man. He'd watched Corwin sign those divorce papers 8 years ago. He'd watched him rebuild ever since. When he handed over the ring, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You got there," he said quietly. "Eventually. Eventually. Better late than never. Much better." Luna and Briar served as flower girls and ring bearers, and, at their own insistence, co-officiants. The justice of the peace allowed them to deliver a portion of the ceremony they'd written themselves. "Do you promise to always come home?" Luna read from a carefully printed piece of paper, her voice serious. "I do. Do you promise to learn the names of all our stuffed animals? Because we got 3 new ones since you learned the first 17. "I do, and I'll learn the new ones too." "Do you promise to love us even when we're grumpy and difficult and don't want to go to bed? Especially when you're grumpy." Briar took over, her handwriting slightly neater than her sister's. "And do you promise to love Mommy the way she deserves, even when it's hard, even when you're tired, even when there are other things you could be doing that seem more important?" The gathered guests went silent. "I promise," Corwin said, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes. To love her the way she deserves. To be present, not just accounted for. To build with her instead of around her. To never again let fear make decisions that love should make. Sarin's eyes overflowed. "Then," the girls announced together, their voices ringing across the pier, "you may kiss the bride." He did, and the guests cheered. And somewhere, in the space between waves crashing and children laughing and a family finally made whole, Corwin Ashford understood what legacy actually meant. They built their life in Portland, close to the community Sarin had created during her years alone. Ashford Development opened a regional office focused on sustainable housing and community development. The aggressive expansion slowed. The constant travel stopped. Corwin worked reasonable hours for the first time in his adult life. He was home for dinner, every night. Without exception, the girls grew up knowing their father as a presence, not an absence. Luna channeled her skepticism into advocacy, becoming a fierce defender of children in foster care by age 12. She'd stand in front of city council meetings demanding better funding, her grey eyes cutting through bureaucratic excuses with surgical precision. Briar became an artist, filling their home with paintings that captured emotions Corwin didn't know could be made visible. Joy rendered in yellow and gold, sadness in blues that made you ache, love in reds and pinks that felt like warmth. Sarin continued her nursing work, part-time now. She had a partner to share the load, a CO parent who showed up, a husband who, when faced with a choice between a business meeting and a school play, chose the school play without hesitation. They weren't perfect. No family is. There were arguments and misunderstandings and days when the old wounds ached. Luna still tested her father sometimes, checking to make sure he would stay. Briar still retreated into her art when emotions got too complicated. Sarin still flinched occasionally when Corwin's phone rang during dinner. But they worked through it. Together. Every night, regardless of what deals were pending or which meetings demanded attention, Corwin was there for bedtime stories. He learned all 17 original stuffed animal names, plus the 3 new ones, plus the 4 that appeared the following Christmas. He attended every school function, every recital, every ordinary Tuesday evening that would have been beneath his notice 8 years ago. Because he'd learned, the hardest possible way, that empires mean nothing without someone to share them. That absence compounds like interest until the debt becomes unpayable. And that the bravest thing a person can do isn't building monuments that last. It's showing up, day after day, for the people who matter. This story isn't just entertainment. It's a mirror. And here's what it's asking you to see. Presence over presence. Corwin built a $300 million empire, but lost what mattered because he was never there. The greatest gift you can give anyone isn't money or success or security. It's your time, your attention, your undivided presence. The people you love don't need your achievements. They need you. Pride destroys what fear won't defend. He was too proud to fight for his marriage and too scared to admit he was wrong. How many relationships have you let die because it was easier to walk away than to be vulnerable? Because admitting you need to change felt like admitting defeat? Manipulation thrives in absence. Rosalind could only poison the relationship because Corwin left space for her lies to grow. Fill your relationships with presence, with communication, with truth, and there's no room for manipulation to take root. Darkness only grows where light refuses to shine. It's never too late to become who you should be. 8 years is a long time, but it's not forever. Corwin couldn't get those years back, but he could decide what to do with every day that followed. He could choose to be different, to be better, to be present. So can you. Today, right now, this moment. Family is built through showing up. Not grand gestures, not expensive gifts, not promises that sound beautiful but never materialize. Just being there, day after day, choice after choice. Through the boring parts, through the hard parts, through the moments when there's nothing exciting happening and you show up anyway because that's what love actually is. Look at your life right now. Who have you been absent from? What relationships have you let fade because you were too busy building something else? What promises have you made and broken because something more important came up? The story of Corwin Ashford could be your story. The 8 years he lost could be the years you save, if you act now, if you choose differently, if you decide that presence matters more than achievement. It's not too late, but it does require a choice, and that choice has to be made today. This story is about second chances, but only for those brave enough to take them. If this moved you, if it made you think about your own relationships, your own absences, your own chances to do better, I need you to do something right now. Drop a comment telling me one person you're going to be more present for starting today. Just one person, one commitment. Write their name. Make it real. Let's hold each other accountable, because words without action are just noise, and you deserve better than that. Hit that subscribe button and join this family. We tell stories that don't just entertain, they transform. Stories that hold up mirrors and ask uncomfortable questions. Stories that might just change how you live your life. Every single day. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who's chosen ambition over family. Someone who's let fear make decisions love should make. Someone who's building monuments while the people they love wait for them to come home. Tag them. Send them this link. Give them the gift of perspective before it's too late. And remember, empires fall. Buildings crumble. Magazine covers fade and billion-dollar valuations become footnotes in history books that nobody reads. But love, real, present, showing up, everyday love, that's the only legacy that actually lasts. Until next time, this is Empire of Lies, reminding you that the biggest lies are often the ones we tell ourselves. But the biggest truth? It's never too late to start telling a different story. Your story. Starting now.